Chapter 268. In the long river of history, many outstanding cultivators with great cultivation talent had died early. Also, the trials had their own rules. Even though it was a pity, and he knew that this black-robed youth would cause some accidents after passing this test, Yantai Guanjin could not interfere. "Who is this?" As this black-robed youth waded through the water and came closer to the green hall, many of the cultivation teachers on the cliff finally noticed his existence and discovered that he was the second person to pass after Ding Ning. "Who is that youth?" In the tent, palace attendant Rong looked with raised eyebrows at the yellow-robed middle-aged man who came to report and asked in irritation. The yellow-robed middle-aged man said respectfully, "Yi Zhengnan, he took a spot from Sandalwood Heart Monastery." Sandalwood Heart Monastery? Palace attendant Rong looked at the yellow-robed middle-aged man, who left under her signal, and sneered. This was a cultivation monastery that belonged to the Ba Mountains. While it had the qualifications to attend Min Mountain Sword Sect, it had declined long ago. No one had come to Chongling in these years. She did not believe that a genius would suddenly appear in a cultivation place like this and not be noticed by the outside world. The only thing she cared about now was who this black-robed youth called Yi Zhengnan was. As the black-robed youth's figure came closer to the green hall, all the cultivation teachers on the cliff felt complicated. The Sandalwood Heart Monastery did not even have a teacher accompanying them to Chongling. If they knew of this youth's strength and had some expectations, there would definitely be someone accompanying him, especially when Yi Zhengnan had passed multiple tests at a speed far faster than the other famous geniuses of Chongling. This was a great honor for those small cultivation places. Therefore, this matter itself was filled with a strange and bizarre flavor. All the teachers of these cultivation places were not skilled in medicine and did not know why this black-robed youth was able to safely pass through this test. But they knew that this black-robed youth was like Lai Yinghong and had some kind of mission. In their sight, the black-robed youth, Yi Zhengnan, was like an unknown shadow floating towards the entrance of the green hall. The one guarding the entrance was still that elegant man in green robes, who did not look like a swordsman, but a private tutor. When Yi Zhengnan's figure appeared in front of him, he had been seriously reading the bamboo scroll in his hand. His expression was calm and had a hint of inexplicable joy. Yet the moment he saw Yi Zhengnan, this elegant man in green robes changed expression. He didn't even say anything, just quickly moving to the side. Then he pointed at the stairs behind him and said, "That is the exit." Yi Zhengnan bowed in thanks and did not speak. He walked past him and stepped onto the stairs that came with the breeze. It was early morning in the valley. Ding Ning had just finished treating the wounds on his body. He was extremely tired and wanted to find a place to lie down and rest for a while. However, he soon sensed an extremely strange aura. Then, the countless little silkworms hidden in the depths of his body naturally began to riot. Countless invisible little silkworms started to furiously tremble deep in his flesh and blood. They surged out, causing Ding Ning's body to uncontrollably tremble. Ding Ning took a deep breath. The small silkworms that had begun to riot and wanted to rush out of his body were forcibly suppressed as he breathed and quickly disappeared in his body. His expression was still calm as he leaned against a pillar in the hut. His gaze did not immediately land on the stone stairs of the green hall, but on the ground next to him. There was an ugly, deep, red, long worm lying there. This was the black frost worm that Qin Yaoyin had given him as a gift. This black frost worm had suffered heavy blows from him in the Sea of Brambles and had been greatly frightened. It had never seen the night and had fainted here. Yet, at this time, when the countless invisible little silkworms in Ding Ning's body moved, this black frost worm woke up. Its body trembled on the ground, and then it tried to do its best to escape from Ding Ning's side. Ding Ning's gaze fell on it, at this moment. Without any movement, Ding Ning's gaze moved slightly, and he slowly released some of the invisible little silkworms from deep inside his body. When those invisible little silkworms moved again in Ding Ning's body, the black frost worm trembled even more. Even its will to escape collapsed, and its body quickly curled into a ball. Ding Ning put away the invisible little silkworms in his body, and did not pay attention to the ugly deep red worm curled up by his feet. It was not that he did not care about this ugly worm. This ugly worm had the strength of a Realm 3 cultivator at the very least. Being able to make it listen to him was equivalent to having a good attendant. Moreover, from its performance just now, it seemed that some of its senses were far superior to powerful cultivators. Qin Yaoyin was one of the top people of Min Mountain Sword Sect, and Min Mountain Sword Sect was an existence that people looked up to in the world. The gift he gave naturally had endless possibilities, and would not be so simple. Also, Ding Ning was not an ordinary cultivator. He faintly felt that this ugly worm would be more useful in his hands than Qin Yaoyin imagined. He was so unconcerned now, because he knew the process of beast taming. The hardest part of beast taming was to make the beast feel terror. This was the hardest step, but he had easily done it. This black frost worm was different from any naturally born beast in the world, but it had great intelligence. Chapter 269. Yi Zhengnan looked at Ding Ning and shook his head. I cannot say. Ding Ning's brows furrowed slightly. He apologized instead. Apologies, perhaps I am too tired, and even my thoughts are affected. No matter. Yi Zhengnan smiled self-deprecatingly. He looked at Ding Ning and said, In Chongling, who does not fear the Emperor's revenge? These were rebellious words. Ding Ning's mind was originally a bit chaotic, but when he heard these words, his body shook slightly and his mind immediately cleared. Your surname is Yi. Ding Ning looked at Yi Zhengnan's features and asked in shock, What is your relationship with Yi Zhong? Yi Zhengnan stilled. He looked at Ding Ning with a surprised gaze and slowly said, You are as knowledgeable as expected. He is my uncle. You are. Ding Ning looked at him. His breathing paused slightly. Yi Zhengnan recovered his calm and said, It seems you have heard much of Chongling's old news, and know some of my Yi family's matters. Ding Ning raised his head and pressed hard between his eyebrows a few times to make himself more awake. What medicine did you bring? He asked seriously, looking at Yi Zhengnan. Yi Zhengnan also became serious and said, Black dragon wood. Ding Ning's eyebrows suddenly jumped. From overseas? Yi Zhengnan glanced at him and nodded. Ding Ning took a deep breath, slowly exhaled, and became silent. He vaguely remembered that he had heard of this medicine before, but in his impression, this medicine seemed to come from Jade Light Island of the overseas islands. Jade Light Island should be one of the cultivation places of the overseas cultivator Guodongjiang, who died at the hands of the Qin dynasty's emperor during the Deer Mountain Conference. At this time, he still did not know what the medicinal power of this medicine was. But for this medicine to appear in front of him, it might already indicate the attitude of some people on the overseas islands towards Yinqin's emperor and empress. It is about time. Yi Zhengnan looked at the silent Ding Ning and said softly. Then his body began to tremble. This kind of trembling was like a person who had been drenched in the cold rain for a long, long time. Even the depths of his body were starting to feel cold. His right hand trembled as he stretched out. Along with the activation of his true essence, wisps of black medicinal qi seeped out from his palm. What seeped out of his palm was not only true essence, but also small drops of blood essence. More and more black medicinal qi condensed in his palm like a burning black flame. And within this black flame, many drops of blood floated. These drops of blood were like pills tumbling in the black flames. They quickly turned black, shrank into even finer crystals, and then slowly gathered together. Seeing this scene, Yi Zhongnan's body trembled even more violently. I don't want your help. But at this time, Ding Ning looked at him and shook his head, saying, No matter whose death warrior you are, I don't want to owe you a favor. Yi Zhongnan stilled, but his movements did not stop. He looked at Ding Ning and said, No one will ask you to return a favor. This is different. Ding Ning looked at him and said calmly, Originally, this was just my personal dispute. But if I accept your help, I will be embroiled in more matters. Yi Zhongnan looked at Ding Ning with a strange gaze. You are still thinking about distant matters. Ding Ning's expression did not change. He said, Why not? Yi Zhongnan frowned and said, I thought you just wanted to get first at all costs. I had not expected you to think about what happens after you get first. Ding Ning nodded and said seriously, Of course, I am not like what you imagine. I can die after getting first. Yi Zhongnan looked at the white frost in Ding Ning's hair and felt Ding Ning's words were laughable. But after a long moment of thought, he said, No matter what you think, you should first know what kind of medicinal power this black dragon wood has. Ding Ning did not speak. He silently agreed to listen to what kind of astounding power the black dragon wood had. Yi Zhongnan nodded politely and said, Black dragon wood is a strange wood that grows from the bones of black blood serpents overseas. While it is a plant, its medicinal power seems to have perfectly inherited the vital energy of the black blood serpent. It can combine with the vital energy of cultivators and quickly turn into large amounts of primal energies of the universe, causing the cultivator's power to increase greatly. Even more importantly, the medicinal power is astounding in regenerating flesh and blood. Even if one is seriously wounded, they can quickly recover. After a pause, Yi Zhongnan looked emotionally at Ding Ning and said, In the legends overseas, black blood serpents are called undying serpents. They say that they can revive even if their heads are cut off. While this is an exaggeration, their astounding recovery abilities are an indisputable fact. Ding Ning said in a low voice, In other words, as long as I accept the medicinal power you bring, even if I am cut by a sword in the following competition, I may not die and may even be able to recover quickly. Yi Zhongnan nodded without hesitation and said, Being stabbed once or twice will not be a problem, and the medicinal power can last for many years. Stabbing once or twice with the sword naturally did not include any fatal injuries, such as having one's heart meridian or 5 internal organs shattered. Needless to say, there was no need to mention that one's head was chopped off. It was just that any wound on the body that could be healed very quickly without affecting the next match. This medicinal effect was already unimaginable in the world. There were many astounding spirit medicines overseas. This was why the armored ships of the Qin dynasty had been tirelessly searching and trading overseas. But even among all the spirit medicines overseas, the black dragon wood was one of the most astounding spirit medicines. Yi Zhongnan thought that he did not need to argue with Ding Ning. He only needed to discuss the medicinal power. He thought that no cultivator attending the Min Mountain Sword trials could resist the temptation of this spirit medicine. He waited for Ding Ning's expression to become excited and then agree. To his surprise, Ding Ning's expression was still as calm as water. I do not need the black dragon wood. Ding Ning looked at him, shook his head quietly, and refused. I don't want to be stabbed. Also, since I passed the previous test so smoothly, even if there is no black dragon wood, I will take first place. Yi Zhongnan was stunned for many breaths. Then his eyes widened. He looked at Ding Ning with an unreasonable gaze and said, You feel that you can win? Your vital energy cultivation is not even realm 4. Do you know what kind of opponents you will encounter in the following trials? Before the Min Mountain Sword trials started, who would have thought that I would win, even in any of the trials? Yet, I was first in each of the previous trials. Ding Ning looked at Yi Zhengnan and said slowly, "Since I am confident, I will not accept your life." Yi Zhengnan froze completely. Even the medicinal power in his body stopped coming out. "You should know that I will not change my mind." Ding Ning looked at Yi Zhengnan and said calmly, "I cannot understand your thoughts." Yi Zhengnan took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. "You should know that regardless of whether you accept or not, I am fated to die." Ding Ning looked at the black medicinal energy rolling in his hand. He narrowed his eyes slightly and sensed the restlessness of the invisible little silkworms in his body. He shook his head. "Not necessarily." Yi Zhengnan swallowed hard and suppressed the rising anger inside. He said coldly, "You do not understand the medicinal power of the black dragonwood. I do not use my vital energy and blood to catalyze the medicinal power of the black dragonwood. The medicinal power of the black dragon wood is a great poison. I cannot withstand it and will quickly die, but I use my vital energy and blood to nurture it. My vital energy and blood are still insufficient. In the end, my organs will be damaged and I will die from poisoning. You can consume the medicine you make yourself." Ding Ning still shook his head and said. Yi Zhengnan laughed in anger. "Can a starving person eat his own flesh and live?" He felt Ding Ning's words were laughable. "I have never seen the black dragonwood, but I have some understanding of the black blood serpent. Since you say that the medicinal power of the black dragon wood inherits the vital energy characteristics of the black blood serpent, the vital energy of the black blood serpent can naturally nourish vitality." Ding Ning looked at his angry face and said, "The bees also eat the honey they make. No one has ever said that the pills made from their vital energy and blood cannot be consumed. Even more importantly, this is Min Mountain Sword Sect." Ding Ning looked up at the peaks in the clouds and said softly, "Min Mountain Sword Sect will not let any student easily die. If they have the ability to save, they will save you. This is the rule of the trials. If you are willing to do as I say, you have a high chance of living." Hearing Ding Ning's calm voice, Yi Zhengnan still felt it was absurd. Yet he started to ponder Ding Ning's words, and even felt that what Ding Ning said was possible. "If you really want to help me, do as I say. Do not persist in your thoughts. Let me rest." Ding Ning's voice reached his ears again. "I will let you see me win." Yi Zhengnan was silent. "You have no other choice." Ding Ning looked at him and closed his eyes. "You can only believe me unless you want to die worthlessly." Chapter 270. Yi Zhengnan looked at Ding Ning, who had his eyes closed. He still felt Ding Ning was hard to understand. "I do not know what you are hesitating for. If I was an overly arrogant person, I would not have said I would win, and won all the way until now. I really do not understand. This is something I can definitely do. Why do I have to give up my life for nothing?" Ding Ning said tiredly with his eyes closed. Then he bowed his head, his breathing quickly becoming even and natural. He just leaned against the wooden pillar behind him and fell asleep. Yi Zhengnan looked silently at the sleeping Ding Ning for a long time. He said with a slightly bitter expression, "The one who really does not understand is me. If this was someone else, even if they had great confidence, they would not refuse a sweet fruit delivered to their mouth. They would not refuse an extra guarantee. Even a rich merchant who could rival a country would not complain that they had too much money. This was a universal principle. Also, in Yi Zhengnan's eyes, Ding Ning needed this guarantee. He could not understand, but he had to start considering his own life and death. He did not fear death, but he would not die for nothing. At this time, there was no one around this crude hut, but this was the trials. If he wanted to force Ding Ning to do something, there would be experts of Min Mountain Sword sect appearing in front of him. Also, if he really formed a useful blood medicine, he would be close to death. Since he could become a true death warrior, Yi Zhengnen naturally had the courage to gamble with his life. He wanted to gamble. He formed the Black Dragon with blood medicine, and then let this blood medicine fall in front of Ding Ning. He wanted to gamble that after he died, Ding Ning would pick up this blood medicine. But at this time, he sensed an unusual gaze. He looked down at the ground next to Ding Ning. What was looking at him was that deep red black ice worm. Disbelief once again appeared in Yi Zhengnen's eyes. He had not been attacked by this kind of black ice worm in the Sea of Brambles, but Ding Ning had not brought this kind of long worm with him at the start of the trials. So this dark red long worm had naturally been obtained by Ding Ning in the Sea of Brambles. Of course, this black ice worm had not been tamed in such a short time. But at this moment, he could sense the fear this black ice worm felt towards Ding Ning, a deep fear. Even after Ding Ning had fallen into a deep sleep, it did not dare to leave Ding Ning's side. Yi Zhengnen looked at the black ice worm in silence for a moment and then changed his mind. The vital energy in his body once again pushed the medicinal energy and blood in his body to seep out of his palm. The rolling black medicinal energy in his hand became thicker and thicker. It no longer looked like black fire, but like a ball of black oil. The bright red blood droplets in the black oil were like tiny rubies. I have seen countless cultivators, but never one like this. After saying this, he, Yantai Guanjian, and Yi Zhengnan disappeared from the huts. Ding Ning's breathing was still calm. Even in Geng Ren's view, he was in a deep sleep. But when Yantai Guanjian and the others disappeared, he finally relaxed and started to sleep. When Ding Ning started to fall into a deep sleep, Fu Su waited in front of a hall of Min Mountain Sword sect with his head bowed. All of Min Mountain Sword sect's buildings were made of green jade, but this hall was golden, because this hall was the temporary residence of the Qin dynasty's emperor. Even the proud Min Mountain Sword sect had to submit to the strongest emperor in the world and express true respect. The doors to the hall opened slightly, and an old man walked out. The old man smiled at Fu Su, his hands in his sleeves. He wore plain satin robes, and people could not connect him to one of the two prime ministers of the Qin dynasty. Behind him, the air of the hall lit up with many fine lights like stars. As a supreme presence descended, the doors to the hall opened completely. Also dressed in casual robes, the Yuanwu emperor passed by this old man and appeared in front of Fu Su. Waving his hand, he indicated that Fu Su did not need to be so courteous. The Yuanwu emperor gently shook his head and said, "You have come to find me to plead for that white goat cave youth." Hearing his father mention his purpose in coming, Fu Su immediately became nervous. He could not speak the words he had been considering for a long time. His head bowed even lower. After a moment of hesitation, he felt that it was useless to say anything else. He struggled to say, "Father, he is my friend." The Yuanwu emperor laughed loudly, and then his smile faded. He shook his head and said, "This lonely one understands your meaning, but you definitely cannot become friends with him." Fu Su's body froze, and his breathing stopped completely. Emperor Yuanwu looked up at the flowing clouds on the distant cliffs. He said slowly, "Back then, when this lonely one met that person and became good friends, this lonely one had not become the crown prince. When we met, our friendship was strong. So as long as that person did not act too recklessly, this lonely one would allow him to do as he pleased. Even in those years when this lonely one was about to ascend the throne and held great power." Hearing the words that entered his ears, Fu Su's expression became more and more stiff, his heart shocked and uneasy. His eyes filled with disbelief. "You also know that this lonely one could not have said these words to you in the past. The Yuanwu emperor looked at Fu Su and said, "But now that you are the crown prince of the Qin dynasty, you should remember some truths. This youth is already stubborn in his actions. If you become friends with him and tolerate him, he may cause even greater storms in the future. This lonely one can allow some cultivators to cause trouble, but I will not allow you to make the same mistakes. Also, you should remember that this lonely one and your mother have always been of the same opinion. You fear that your mother will not agree and come to this lonely one to plead, thinking that I may be more lenient. This thinking is wrong." Looking at Fu Su, who had his head bowed even lower and his body trembling, the Yuanwu emperor's voice grew gentler. "But since you have pleaded for him today, as long as you remember what this lonely one said to you today, this lonely one can give him some more chances." Fu Su was extremely moved and knelt down. "You think of him as a friend, but this matter depends on whether he thinks of you as a friend and how much he is willing to do for you." The Yuanwu emperor said coolly, "Tell him to give up first. Even if he ends up second in the sword trials, this lonely one will give him a position." Fu Su was speechless. "Go." The Yuanwu emperor waved his hand, indicating that he could leave. Fu Su bowed again, in thanks. The Yuanwu emperor smiled slightly, but when Fu Su turned to leave, his brow suddenly furrowed. Fu Su's features were clean and kind, but when his gaze flashed, he felt disgust. But he did not know where this feeling came from. Chapter 271. Fu Su did not know that the Yuanwu emperor inexplicably felt a thread of disgust when he looked at his features. He walked quickly in joy and wanted to reach Ding Ning in one step. "You prepare to go and see Ding Ning like this?" But at this time, an old and benevolent voice sounded behind him. Fu Su turned in shock. The old man in plain satin robes was behind him. "Minister Yen." Fu Su bowed respectfully to this old man and said in puzzlement, "You mean?" This seemingly ordinary old man was naturally one of the two ministers of the Qin dynasty, Minister Yen. On the eve of the Deer Mountain Conference, Yangshan Commandery had been taken back by the Qin dynasty. In that battle, the famous Chu general Fan Donglu had died under the sword of the Qin dynasty empress. But everyone knew that the one responsible for commanding the army was Minister Yen. To be able to have such an army enter Yangshan Commandery without being detected by the dynasties, this was enough to show how terrifying this old man was. "Jing Liuli will not let you see that white goat cave youth." Minister Yen bowed in return and said in a harmonious voice, "Actually, if it was anyone else, they would not agree to let you see that white goat cave youth." Fu Su stilled and said, "Why?" "Because the Min Mountain Sword trials are an internal matter of Min Mountain Sword sect. Min Mountain Sword sect will not let anyone interfere and change the course of the trials, not even you." Minister Yen looked at Fu Su and smiled slightly. He said, "Even if many things can be done, they need to consider the rules and face, and cannot be done openly." Fu Su reacted and said sincerely, "Minister Yen, please help." Minister Yen smiled and nodded in agreement. Looking at Fu Su's overjoyed expression, he smiled self-mockingly inside. He knew that after today, this new crown prince would start to understand what balance and power were. Ding Ning was in a deep sleep. It could even be said that he slept deeper than any previous sleep. This was not because he was too tired, but because this was the trials of Min Mountain Sword sect. It was safer than any other place in Chanling. Before the third challenger appeared, the valley was quiet. However, as the sound of footsteps rang out, the light in front of Ding Ning slightly distorted. A middle-aged man in green robes appeared in front of Ding Ning. The moment this middle-aged man in green robes appeared in front of Ding Ning, Jing Liuli's figure also appeared in the empty space outside the hut. Jing Lioli looked at the middle-aged man's back with a cold expression. She didn't say anything, but she was ready to draw her sword. This middle-aged man dressed in indigo robes was one of her sect uncles. His status in Min Mountain Sword sect was extraordinary, but he should not have appeared here. Do not be nervous. I am just following the sect master's orders to come alone and ask him a few questions. The middle-aged man in green robes naturally sensed Jing Lioli's murderousness, but his expression was natural, and he spoke coolly, without even turning his head. Jing Lioli's brow furrowed slightly. She did not say anything. Her figure moved, and she disappeared from the cliff. The middle-aged man smiled slightly. A breeze formed between him and Ding Ning and blew at Ding Ning's forehead. The breeze naturally carried some cold water droplets that wet Ding Ning's forehead. Ding Ning woke up. He saw this unfamiliar Min Mountain Sword sect cultivator standing in front of him recover absolute lucidity in a breath. Seeing Ding Ning's muddy and dazed gaze turn to absolute clarity and wariness, the middle-aged man once again praised in his mind. Then he smiled slightly and said apologetically, "Apologies for disturbing your rest. I did not come to urge you to proceed with the following sword trials. I am just a lobbyist." Ding Ning narrowed his eyes slightly. He first sensed the movements in his body. After confirming that there was nothing unusual about his body before this Min Mountain Sword sect cultivator arrived, he started to look seriously at this Min Mountain Sword sect cultivator. Looking at this middle-aged man's clean and fine face, he was sure this middle-aged man was unfamiliar to him. "What is your name?" Ding Ning did not stand up, but continued to lean against the wall and asked. "Hishan Jian." The middle-aged man smiled and answered simply. Ding Ning looked at him and said, "What do you want to say?" Hishan Jian glanced at him and said, "I have come on behalf of the Crown Prince." Ding Ning frowned and did not speak. Hishan Jian continued, "The Crown Prince pleaded for you in front of the Holy One. Because you are the Crown Prince's friend, the Holy One agreed. If you do not win, there will be a place for you in Chongling in the future." Ding Ning bowed his head and said, "I know." Hishan Jian stilled. "There will be a place for you in Chongling in the future." This was the Holy One's personal promise. Even he could not help but feel jealous of such a promise. But this youth in front of him just said lightly, "I know." He could not help but look at Ding Ning and ask, "Do you know the true meaning of the words I brought?" Ding Ning did not look up and said, "I know." Hishan Jian frowned deeply. He thought for a long time and asked, "You are not prepared to say anything?" Ding Ning shook his head. Hishan Jian took a deep breath and his frown deepened, but he did not speak more. He nodded to show he had heard and then turned to walk out of the hut. The light on the cliff flickered. Hishan Jian's figure floated on the cliff path like a flickering light and passing shadow, heading toward the bright yellow palace in the distance. Every time the corner of his eyes caught sight of that bright yellow color, his gaze would become even more fervent. He knew that after he left Min Mountain Sword sect today, there would be a vast world waiting for him. Fu Su was waiting anxiously on the steps not far from the palace. He saw Hishan Jian's figure in the distance, and his gaze quickly grew heated. He wanted to immediately ask Hishan Jian what Ding Ning had said. But at this time, Hishan Jian's figure suddenly stopped. The flickering figure stood like an ice sculpture on the green jade path between the mountains. The light rays that were originally flickering between the cliffs were broken by an invisible force. This powerful force seemed to pierce through the sky. The mountain path in front of Hishan Jian became brighter and brighter. Fu Su's eyes widened. He did not know what had happened, but felt unusually anxious. A white figure appeared on the bright green jade mountain path. This person was clearly a cultivator of Min Mountain Sword sect. Among all the cultivators of Min Mountain Sword sect, only one cultivator was obsessed with cleanliness and liked to wear unusually clean white robes. He was naturally different from all the other Min Mountain Sword sect cultivators who wore jade robes. This person was the master of Min Mountain Sword sect, Bailey Sushua. Fu Su was shocked speechless. His eyes hurt because of the brightness, but inexplicably, when he faced other Min Mountain Sword sect cultivators before, the sword essence was so blinding and painful that he could not see the other's true appearance. But facing this legendary master of Min Mountain Sword sect, even at such a distance, the other's figure grew clearer. The other scenery on the cliff was not clear, but Bailey Sushua's figure grew clearer in his eyes. He even saw Bailey Sushua's face clearly. The legendary master of Min Mountain Sword sect was a slender man with long black hair and a face that could be described as beautiful. He was prettier than most women in Chongling. Time had not left any marks on his body. He looked extremely young, just in his 20s. Dressed in white robes, Bailey Sushua looked coldly at Hishanjian, who was standing stiffly on the path. The eagerness in Hishanjian's eyes had long disappeared and turned into terror. Is Min Mountain Sword sect not good? Bailey Sushua said. His voice was very soft and very pleasant to the ear, very pleasant to the ear. But Hishanjian's body seemed to have countless icicles clanging and giving off cold energy, causing his body to tremble uncontrollably. Is it not better than fighting for power and not being able to control yourself outside? Bailey Sushua looked coldly at him and said. Hishanjian took a deep breath and could not control his trembling, but he still bowed deeply and said, I am following orders. Sect Master, please consider our past relationship and let me live. A hint of disdain flashed through Bailey Sushua's eyes. Even if you have been working for Zhengxiu or other people, I may have let you live because we are both cultivators of the Qin dynasty, and you have not done anything out of line in my sword sect for so many years. But you did something wrong. Hishanjian broke out in a cold sweat. He knew he could not escape, but he was extremely unwilling and puzzled. He could not help but shout, What did I do wrong? If you only wanted to be a lobbyist, you could have found another reason to get close to that student. Bailey Sushua looked at him with disgust and said in a cold voice, But you were wrong in using my name and saying that I told you to ask that student something. Hishanjian was stunned. In the next moment, his body was filled with great terror. He opened his mouth to howl, trying to see if he could escape to that yellow palace. But the moment he opened his mouth, he found he could not speak. There was a white light at his throat. Then his body fell backwards. The moment he hit the ground, the white light came out of the back of his head, and cold energy spread through his body. He immediately turned into a corpse covered in thick white frost. Bailey Sushua looked at Hishanjian's corpse, which did not have a drop of blood, and frowned in disgust. He did not look back, but knew that Fu Su was gaping in shock, but unable to make a sound. Everyone knows I am petty. Min Mountain Sword sect has its own rules. Anyone who wants to play with power will have to pay a price. You should be able to remember this lesson. Bailey Sushua had a scornful smile as he said mentally to the crown prince of the Qin dynasty. Then his figure disappeared from the cliff. Behind the shocked and speechless Fu Su, Minister Yen just smiled. This was his first lesson to Fu Su. Chapter 272. In the eyes of the truly powerful, like Prime Minister Yen, killing with a sword was always the lowest tactic. Playing with balance and controlling multiple factions in the palm of one's hand was the true skill. As a crown prince and the future successor to the Qin dynasty, he had to at least know the consequences of each decree he gave and the price he would pay. Palace attendant Rong naturally understood these principles better than most people in Chongling. So when she heard the report that a powerful Realm 7 cultivator had been killed on the path by Bailey Sushue, who rarely showed himself, a cruel and cold smile appeared at the corners of her mouth. Even a person like He Shanjian could be casually sacrificed. A genius who was fated to age early due to his excessive energies was nothing to Changling. In Changling, any cultivator was the personal property of the Holy One and the Empress. If other people wanted to use a piece of jade in the imperial palace, it was a capital crime. But the master of the imperial palace might just put that piece of jade on the ground as a decoration. She regretted that Ding Ning had not seen Bailey Sushue kill He Shanjian with his own eyes. In this case, she felt that Ding Ning might understand that his struggle was meaningless to the truly powerful of Changling. Min Mountain Sword Sect did not intend to conceal the fact that Bailey Sushue, the sect master who had not shown himself for a long time, had killed He Shanjian. When palace attendant Rong received the report, the news had spread through the cliffs. Almost all the cultivation teachers who had come to watch the trials were in great shock. Even though He Shanjian had been working for the court in these years, even if he had leaked many matters of Min Mountain Sword Sect to the Changling Imperial Palace, he had not colluded with the enemy. He was just working for the court. Also, the Yuanwu Emperor was still in Min Mountain Sword Sect. What kind of courage did Bailey Sushue have to kill He Shanjian in front of the Yuanwu Emperor? Jing Liuli turned to look at the mountain path where He Shanjian's corpse was. The light in front of her quickly twisted. Bailey Sushue seemed to pass through a strange door of light and appeared in front of her. Other people could not see the legendary master of Min Mountain Sword Sect, but she had seen him often, so she did not have much surprise on her face. She bowed respectfully and said, "Master, that young man is very interesting. It's just that the path some people start on is often different from the path they end up on. Since there are so many people who want to talk to this young man, and there are so many little ghosts, let them talk to their heart's content, and let the little ghosts show themselves." Bailey Sushue looked coldly at Jing Liuli, said a few words, and then turned, disappearing into the twisted light. Jing Liuli lowered her head and thought for a moment, understanding the meaning of Bailey Sushue's words. The feelings of all the teachers of the various cultivation places on the cliff quickly became more and more complicated. They were told that in the last segment of the sword trial, they could enter the valley for a closer look. Being able to enter the valley and observe meant that it would be much easier to send messages to the students. Even more importantly, Min Mountain Sword Sect may not stop some people from sending messages to the students. This would make He Shanjian's death seem meaningless, like a joke. Was Min Mountain Sword Sect not afraid of becoming the second Bazin Kendo ground? At this time, many people started to sympathize with White Goat Cave and even the Green Vine Sword Academy, because at this time, the third and fourth people to pass the trial appeared in the Sea of Brambles. Zhang Yi and Su Lianhua's figures slowly appeared from the shadows of the cliff. When Zhang Yi had encountered Su Lianhua, at least a dozen students had been closer to the exit than him. But because he had not been wounded, and his guess had been correct, no new imperial insect swarms had threatened him, and Su Lianhua along the way, he and Su Lianhua had become the third and fourth people to pass after Yi Zhengnan. While Yi Zhengnan was ahead of Zhang Yi, he had already left the trials. Su Lianhua had been carried out by Zhang Yi, so Zhang Yi was equivalent to the second student to pass the Sea of Brambles and qualify for the trials. Palace attendant Rong, who represented the mistress of the imperial palace, did not want to see the cultivators of White Goat Cave stand out in the trials, but these two youths from White Goat Cave had played a great joke on her. Many people started to worry that the mistress of the imperial palace would vent her anger on White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy because of Bailey Sushue's joke. Did we come out too late? Zhang Yi looked at the silent mountain valley and could not help but feel ashamed. Su Lianhua's eyebrows rose. He wanted to scold Zhang Yi's stupidity. With his strength, he had suffered such serious injuries. How could other people have come out faster than them? But when he thought of how Zhang Yi was smarter than him most of the time, he controlled himself and said, "Put me down. Why is there no one here?" Zhang Yi looked in shock at the empty mountain valley and the seemingly empty hut. He turned his head hesitantly and said, "Should I carry you to the hut and put you down?" Su Lianhua could not help but say angrily, "What does it matter if we take a few more steps or a few less steps?" Zhang Yi seemed to realize that he was being overly sentimental. He put down Su Lianhua in embarrassment and walked forward a few steps. Then he gave a shout of joy. Su Lianhua bumped into the back of Zhang Yi, who had suddenly stopped. His wounds immediately hurt. He could not help but say angrily, "What are you doing? Be softer." Zhang Yi looked back at him with unspeakable joy. "You are so loud, but you tell me not to be loud?" Su Lianhua felt that there was something wrong with Zhang Yi's head. But when he saw the scene in the hut, he immediately understood why Zhang Yi was like this. He is first again looking at Ding Ning, who was leaning against a pillar and sleeping behind a table, and seeing that Ding Ning did not have many obvious wounds, and confirming that there was no one else near the hut, Su Lianhua grew silent and felt respect. Once or twice could be explained by coincidence, but too many coincidences were inevitable. "My junior sect brother is really extraordinary." Zhang Yi entered the hut. When he arrived in front of Ding Ning, he did not know what to do. Su Lianhua was even more silent. This was because he saw that the tables in these huts only had the simplest gauze used to stop bleeding, and there was no special treatment medicine. He took a deep breath, grabbed some gauze, and walked to a sunny open space behind the hut. He started to take off the tattered clothing that had completely stuck to his wounds. The stuck clothing and blood scabs peeled off his body. His eyebrows twitched, and his wounds started to bleed again. Zhang Yi walked behind Su Lianhua and saw that after Su Lianhua peeled off the clothes and scabs on her body, she let the wound bleed and did not immediately bandage it with hemostatic gauze. He could not help but ask, "You don't know how to bandage?" Su Lianhua looked helplessly at Zhang Yi, who thought of him as an ignorant child. He said, depressed, "Of course not." Zhang Yi stilled and said, "Then what are you doing?" "You also see that there are no other medicines here. Min Mountain Sword Sect wants us to participate in the following trials with wounds." Su Lianhua raised her head and narrowed her eyes to look at the scorching sun above her head. She said slowly, "My master once told me that in a situation where there is no other way, sometimes one's own blood and sunlight can be a kind of medicine for fresh wounds. Basking in the sun is useful." Zhang Yi looked suspiciously at Su Lianhua's bleeding wounds. Using the wind and sunlight to make the wounds naturally clot, and then using gauze to stop the bleeding is definitely more useful than using gauze to forcefully stop the bleeding now. Su Lianhua looked down at his bleeding wounds. After a moment of silence, he said, "I hope it is useful." Zhang Yi knew that Su Lianhua's condition was not optimistic. He swallowed hard, feeling the warmth of the sun, and said seriously, "I also hope it is useful." Su Lianhua did not respond. He took a deep breath, raised his sword, and cut away some of the rotting things on his wounds. Sometimes the best use of friends was to accompany. Zhang Yi saw that Su Lianhua did not need his help. He hesitated and asked, "Basking in the sun is a good thing. Otherwise, people who do not know your personality will think you are hypocritical." Zhang Yi stilled. The two were not familiar with Ku Shichuan and Ku Shichuan. Because of Ding Ning, Zhang Yi and Ku Shichuan had some differences, so he did not want to greet them and spoke in low voices. "I have long heard that the Mind Chamber Sect's thought sword is unique. Even if you have not reached Realm 5, you can control a flying sword, and make the sword energy seem alive. While I have not seen it with my own eyes, the rumors must be true. Otherwise, Brother E would not have passed first. At this time, the voice sounded from the exit of the cliff and clearly reached their ears. Hearing this voice, Su Lianhua stilled slightly. She immediately reacted and said with slight disdain, "Zhang Yi, you saw no one in the hut and thought that we were the last to come out. This Ku Shichuan is conceited. He saw no one in the hut and thought that no one had passed before him any Exan." Zhang Yi nodded and said softly, "Ku Shichuan is slightly conceited." The person speaking in front of Exan was naturally Ku Shichuan. Compared to the beginning of the trials, Ku Shichuan's appearance did not seem to have changed. There were no wounds on his body, and even his presence was calm. However, the threads of blood at the corners of his eyes were thicker. Looking at Ku Shichuan, who could be described as calm and composed, Exan's strange feeling grew. My mind chamber sex thought sword is famous, but in comparison, I fear that your Shadow Mountain Sword Cave's sword manual is more exquisite, Exan said slowly after a moment of silence. Ku Shichuan smiled unconcernedly. He turned around and looked at the mountain path he had come from. No matter what, it is not that person who was first. Exan knew that the person Ku Shichuan spoke of was Ding Ning, who had been first in succession. However, he had no intentions of targeting Ding Ning, and was extremely tired right now, so he was not willing to respond. At this time, Ku Shichuan's smile quickly faded, because footsteps sounded from the cliff behind him. His gaze turned dark and cold. He was slightly worried that Ding Ning would appear at this time, but even if Ding Ning appeared at this time, he would be behind him. However, his pupils began to contract violently again, and a look of disbelief quickly spread across his face. What appeared in his line of sight was a tall girl. Among the students attending the trials, there were far fewer women than men. This young woman who walked out shocked Ku Shichuan more than any other woman. If Zhang Yi, who was several huts away, could see this young woman, he would not believe his eyes. The young woman who walked out was Xie Rou. While Xie Rou was famous in Chongling and Guanzhong, this was because she was the eldest daughter of the Guanzhong Xie family. She participated in many of the Guanzhong Xie family's businesses, and not because of her cultivation. Ku Shichuan had never thought that she could pass through the sea of brambles, much less appear so quickly. Xie Rou did not walk quickly, and appeared to be struggling. Yet Ku Shichuan's expression grew even stiffer, because he saw that Xie Rou was not injured. His gaze landed on Xie Rou's hand. Then his gaze grew even more disbelieving. A long sword like the black sword of the Qin dynasty was held by Xie Rou like a cane. Xie Rou did not have any other sword on her. "I heard what you said just now." At this time, Xie Rou walked out of the shadows of the cliff and into the sunlight. She glanced at the empty hut and then looked at Ku Shichuan with a sorrowful and angry gaze. She said, "But even if he did not pass this trial, you are not as good as him." Ku Shichuan's eyebrows slowly rose, and his expression turned cold. He could not help but think of Xie Changsheng. Xie Changsheng had liked to mock him in the past, but that was in the past. He could in the past, but that did not mean he could now. "I do not understand what you mean." He coldly shook his head and said to Xie Rou, thinking of the consequences of Ding Ning not being able to pass through the sea of brambles, and when the trials, Xie Rou felt even more sorrowful. She gritted her teeth and was about to speak, but Ku Shichuan spoke first. A cultivator's ability is reflected in many aspects. If you insist that I am not as good as him in some areas, I have nothing to say. Ku Shichuan's lips curled into a sneer. If you say that I am behind him in the previous trials, I have nothing to say. But the trials only care about the final results. No matter how bright a shooting star is, it is still a shooting star. Sierra's body unconsciously trembled. Not seeing Ding Ning's figure, her mind was in chaos. She did not know what to say in response to Ku Shichuan's scorn. Ku Shichuan and Sierra's conversation clearly reached the hut in the distance. Looking at Zhang Yi, who wanted to speak but was hesitating, Su Yanhua could not help but sneer. Zhang Yi, are you deaf? You can still tolerate it even now. Did you have to wait until Xia Rou could not help but fight him before you say Ding Ning was here long ago? Hearing Su Lianhua's words, Zhang Yi, who had been considering whether he should be polite or not, suddenly woke up. His breathing paused, and he was about to speak. But at this time, there was a muffled sound in the silent hut like someone was knocking on the wall. Ku Shichuan, Xian, and Xia Rou shook at the same time and instinctively turned to look into the hut. Zhang Yi and Su Lianhua were also stunned. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. Was there someone else in the hut? A deep red shadow appeared in front of Ku Shichuan and the others. Xia Rou was stunned. Xian was also shocked. Ku Shichuan's stiff expression eased. So it is, why is there such an insect here? But at this time, a wave of exclamations sounded from behind the hut. Zhang Yi. Chapter 274. As this voice sounded, the mountain valley fell silent again. Xia Rou looked towards the back of the hut where the voice had come from and was excited beyond words. Xian felt extremely embarrassed. He thought he was the winner of this round and had not expected that many people had gathered behind the hut. Zhang Yi was very ashamed. He felt that he had caused too much of a commotion and disturbed Ding Ning's rest. Su Lianhua was shocked. He could not understand how Ding Ning could bring out such a long worm. Also, with such a long worm by his side, Ding Ning could sleep peacefully. Had this long worm really been tamed by Ding Ning? But how was this possible in such a short time? Each of them had different emotions. None of them ridiculed Ku Shichuan at this time. No one even looked at Ku Shichuan. Yet the moment Ding Ning's voice sounded, the black ice worm that had come out of the hut immediately stopped, and then slowly made a circle and crawled towards the back of the hut. It seemed to be very afraid, but did not dare to not return to Ding Ning's side. It also wanted to seek protection from Ding Ning, so its crawling appearance was very comical. Yet Ku Shichuan felt that this long worm seemed to be crawling on his face. Ku Shichuan was silent for a moment. In the end, he did not speak and walked towards a hut alone. Junior sect brother Zhang Yi was the first to break the silence. He turned to look at Ding Ning sitting on the ground and wanted to apologize. Only you and Xia Rou came out? Ding Ning glanced at him and interrupted his apology. Zhang Yi was startled. Suddenly, he felt a little worried and nodded. What enmity do you have with Ku Shichuan? Su Lianhua could not help but ask. Zhang Yi shook his head and said, there is no enmity. Su Lianhua immediately frowned and looked at Zhang Yi in disbelief. If there's no enmity, why would you do this? Zhang Yi's expression became a little strange as he said in a low voice, it's just that every time he said that junior brother Ding Ning was a failure, he would immediately be proven wrong. Many times before, Su Lianhua thought about what Ku Shichuan had said to Xian just now when she thought she was the second to pass, and what she had said to Xia Rou. Looking at the scene in front of him, he couldn't help but shake his head in sympathy and said, this is really tragic. However, this doesn't mean that there is no enmity between them. To be publicly slapped in the face while thinking that they were in the limelight, this is truly a great enmity. Su Lianhua's gaze landed on Ding Ning, and the black ice worm crawling towards Ding Ning. She asked, how were you able to bring out a worm like this from inside? Junior brother, this is Su Lianhua. We are friends. Zhang Yi knew that Ding Ning was not as good-tempered as he was. He feared that Ding Ning would be rude to Su Lianhua and hurriedly added. Ding Ning's expression did not change. He just glanced at Su Lianhua and said simply, "This is Min Mountain Sword Sect." Su Lianhua stilled and immediately reacted. This was Min Mountain Sword Sect, and Min Mountain Sword Sect was the most stingy cultivation place. If not for Min Mountain Sword Sect's permission, no one could take away a blade of grass from Min Mountain Sword Sect. Before seeing you, I really thought I was the first to pass. Ding Ning, you are really strong. In the many years of the Min Mountain Sword trials, only you were able to receive a reward from Min Mountain Sword Sect. At this time, Xian's voice sounded. He and Xie Ro had circled around the hut and came to the open space bathed in sunlight. Ding Ning looked at Xian and nodded in greeting. After a moment of silence, he said, "If Cave Master knew, he would be very happy." The place sank into silence again. The teachers of the cultivation places would naturally be very happy when a student won consecutively and did what all the other students had failed to do before. But it was a pity that Xue Wangshu could not see it. Regardless of whether it is meaningful or not, I still admire all of you. Xian was silent for a moment before he said seriously and sat down. Actually, Zhang Yi hesitated, but still said softly, "In reality, we should all stand on junior brother Ding Ning's side. If possible, if it does not affect our chances of entering the Min Mountain Sword trials. If possible, we should do our best to help junior brother Ding Ning win first. You are not wishy-washy at all this time. You have the courage to say such a thing." Su Lianhua turned to look at Zhang Yi and said with slight disdain, "You think this is a simple matter of treating someone to a meal?" Zhang Yi bowed his head slightly and did not dare to look at Su Lianhua's eyes. But he still said, "In reality, you should have heard some things about White Goat Cave. You all know that many things are not fair to White Goat Cave and my junior brother. I just think if no one fights, then she can have any cultivation place she wants in the future. If no one stands on his side when someone comes out to fight, I think some people will not need to consider other people's feelings in the future. This is not helping my junior brother and White Goat Cave." Zhang Yi bowed his head and said sadly, "White Goat Cave no longer exists, and Cave Master is no longer here. This is helping all the cultivation places in Chongling. If I was a student of another cultivation place, I would definitely help if I encountered something like this." Xian and Su Lianhua were both shocked. Zhang Yi's words were reasonable, but even more importantly, even though Zhang Yi had many flaws, he was like a pool of clear water that anyone could see clearly. Everyone could see that Zhang Yi was sincere. The truth of a person like this, his sadness and self-blame, for some inexplicable reason, were exceptionally touching. Xian and Su Lianhua did not speak. Xie Ro was on Ding Ning's side. She naturally did not need to express any attitude, so no one spoke. Zhang Yi did not feel disappointed. He thought of something and turned around. Looking at the hut that blocked their view, he said, "Why don't we remove a few pieces of the walls of the hut? This way we can see who has passed, and those who have passed will not think that no one has come out. This will prevent any misunderstandings and make people feel awkward." Hearing these words, Xian could not help but grimace. Zhang Yi was a person that people could easily see through. Even though he had only interacted with Zhang Yi for a short period of time, he could hear Zhang Yi's meaning now. It was not that he could see who had come out at a glance, but he was afraid that the people who came out would think that no one had come before them and say something embarrassing. Zhang Yi was thinking for others and did not want them to be embarrassed. Looking at Zhang Yi's profile, Xian could not help but sigh. He could not understand why Ku Shichuan had a grudge against them. Seeing no objections, Zhang Yi started to take down several pieces of wood from the hut facing them. Figures moved among the cliffs as more students came out. Zhang Yi looked up expectantly. He hoped to see Shen Yi, Xie Chongsheng, Nangong Kaishu, and the others. But his heart immediately fell. The newcomer was dressed in pure white robes and was clean and untainted. This was Yi Haoren from the Li Lingjun establishment. After taking down several pieces of wood, a door opened like some shops in falling parasol. Yi Haoren, who walked out of the shadows of the cliffs, easily met the gazes of Zhang Yi and the others. Seeing Ding Ning and Zhang Yi here, Yi Haoren's pupils contracted slightly. Then he saw that other than Xie Rou, Xin, and Su Lianhua were also sitting. Yi Haoren frowned deeply. He frowned and looked silently at Xin and Su Lianhua. Xin and Su Lianhua also saw Yi Haoren's gaze. Then Su Lianhua glanced at Xin. Xin's expression was normal. He glanced at the warm sunlight above, and then slowly lay down on the wooden boards Zhang Yi had taken down. Yi Haoren's eyebrows rose. He did not look at the people here, and walked towards a hut at the side. "What is it?" Zhang Yi felt the atmosphere was not right, and could not help but ask softly. "Sometimes you are very powerful, but sometimes you make people helpless." Ding Ning looked at him and answered, "Help or not, be friends. Do you have to say it?" Zhang Yi's body suddenly shook. He reacted and looked at Su Lianhua and Xin. His lips trembled. "Do not waste words." Su Lianhua waved her hand and lay down on the wooden boards Zhang Yi had taken down. "Do I have to thank you because I feel that lying on the boards you took down is more comfortable than sleeping on the ground?" Zhang Yi stilled and felt slightly ashamed. But moments later, he still felt that he had to do something for Su Lianhua and the others. Chapter 2, 75. Su Lianhua wanted to say, "Why don't you go cook a bowl of noodles for us?" But looking at Zhang Yi's clean features, he felt defeated and swallowed his words. Rain clouds formed in front of the hut, and it started to rain. Then smoke came out of the valley. Zhang Yi was not speaking casually. He really used a metal pot to catch the rainwater formed from his sword essence, and then started a fire to boil water. Many of the cultivation teachers on the cliff looked at the smoke rising from the valley and felt emotional. It was a solemn and heavy sword trial, but Zhang Yi made a fire and boiled water, adding the flavor of life and human touch to the streets for no reason. Many people knew that after Shui Wangshu and General Liang's battle, he had been recuperating in falling parasol. Usually, Zhang Yi and the others had taken care of him. Seeing Zhang Yi skillfully start a fire and boil water, many people imagined the scene of Zhang Yi carefully taking care of Shui Wangshu in falling parasol. They grew even quieter. Unlike the silence of many people, Sikong Lin, the vice bureau chief of the Bureau of Ceremonies, had a joyful light in his eyes. Before this, he had been very pessimistic. The fewer people on Ding Ning's side, the more cruel battles Ding Ning would encounter in the following trials. This was a simple principle. But now, things had changed. The cause of this change was Zhang Yi, who had not been noticed and was thought to be mediocre by most people. How could such a person, who was able to change the entire situation, be a mediocre and incompetent person? The fire in the stove burned brighter, and the water was about to boil. At this time, students on the mountain path started to walk out. Other than Ding Ning, many of the other people were about the same. When Ku Shichuan reached the exit, many people were also near the exit. A young girl dressed in simple linen robes appeared in Su Lianhua's sight. Su Lianhua's eyes lit up. He, who was lying on his side and looking at the exit, waved his hand at the young girl without the slightest demeanor of an expert. The young girl was stunned for a moment before walking towards Su Lianhua. She directly passed through the simple and crude hut. When she walked past the gap that Zhang Yi had torn out, she couldn't help but turn her head to look at Zhang Yi again. "Why are you completely fine?" Su Lianhua sat up and asked simply as she looked at the girl in plain robes who had walked up to her. This young girl was naturally the most outstanding student of the Plain Heart Sword House, Xia Wan. Looking at the dense and crisscrossing bandages on Su Lianhua's body, Xia Wan's brows immediately furrowed, but a look of relief flashed through her eyes. When I was choosing my sword earlier, I chose the Duobao sword from the Duobao Pavilion of Dehan. She looked at Ding Ning behind Su Lianhua and Exin next to him. Then she saw the black ice worm curled up next to Ding Ning. Her eyes immediately widened. After being stunned for a few breaths, she came back to her senses and looked at Su Lianhua again to explain, there are many arcane tools in the multi-treasure sword. The strings inside can be used to deal with the large number of strange insects inside. Su Lianhua looked up slightly at the long sword with a black hilt and indigo body on Xia Wan's back. He asked inquisitively, something like a horse tripping rope? Xia Wan nodded and said, similar. Su Lianhua gave an honest evaluation. Your luck is not bad. Xia Wan did not say anything else and just looked at him. Zhang Yi is boiling water for me to drink. Su Lianhua looked at her and said, with this sentence, Xia Wan could see his meaning. Then she sat down in the empty space next to Su Lianhua and said, tiredly, drinking something hot will make you feel better. Then she could not shake off her natural curiosity as a young girl. She could not help but ask softly, what is with that worm? Ding Ning did not close his eyes to sleep. Too much rest could also slow down one's reaction, so he had to constantly adjust his body to a state that was very conducive to battle. Actually, Xie Changxing has a chance to come out. While Xia Wan and Su Lianhua were talking, he did not turn his head and said softly to Xie Ro, while I could not have predicted that there would be such a test after the Sword Valley sword selection, the sword he chose is very suitable for this test. He Zhaoxi has the best endurance. I even think that he will come out earlier than my senior sect brother, Zhang Yi. It seems that I underestimated my senior sect brother. Ding Ning looked at Zhang Yi, who was tending to the fire, and said in a low voice, in reality, of everyone, I am most worried about Shen Yi. If they have the same luck, Su Hashan and Nangong Caishu's swordsmanship and sword are more suitable than him. Xia Ro looked at his profile and felt inexplicably moved. While Ding Ning seemed to be absolutely calm most of the time without any special emotions and was as unapproachable as a frozen mountain peak, she knew that Ding Ning and Zhang Yi were the same in many ways. At this time, she was suddenly shocked, because after a person walked out of the mountain path between the cliffs, he walked straight towards Zhang Yi, who was lighting the fire, and the place where she, Ding Ning, and the others were. Many students had walked out at this time, and some of them were ranked high on the talent ranking. Yet, including everyone who had walked out before, including Ding Ning, no one had an expression as relaxed as this person. This was a bone-deep relaxation, and even joy. It was as though that terrifying sea of brambles was just a familiar home to this person. He seemed to have eaten lunch in a familiar home and then strolled out of the door. This was a youth who looked smaller and thinner than Ding Ning. Chapter 276. Your worm is very interesting. Then his gaze landed on the black ice worm next to Ding Ning. Dugubai's gaze was gentle, and there was a hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. But inexplicably, the black ice worm felt great terror. Its body unconsciously curled towards Ding Ning. Seeing the black ice worm's actions, Ding Ning's eyebrows rose slightly. This black ice worm's reaction surpassed his expectations. He started to feel that Qing Yaoyin's gift to him was worth anticipating. I have a sword move called Peacock Green. Seeing Ding Ning slowly raise his eyebrows, Dugubai put away his smile and looked seriously at Ding Ning. He said, I feel this sword move is very useful to me, very powerful, but my teacher and I cannot comprehend it. Hearing Dugubai's words, Su Lianhua and the others grew solemn, and then even more shocked. Dugu Bai's words were simple, but they contained astounding information. Dugu Bai actually wanted to ask Ding Ning for advice on sword moves. Each generation of the Dugu family was filled with astounding geniuses. Those who could become Dugu Bai's teacher naturally had astounding cultivation and status. Dugu Bai and his teacher could not comprehend something Dugu Bai was preparing to ask Ding Ning for advice. Dugu Bai looked at Ding Ning and said, "The peacock green sword move comes from the Ming King remnant manual. Wei Liaozi cultivates this remnant manual." Wei Liaozi, Su Lianhua, and the others were already very shocked. The moment they heard this name, they were even more astounded. Wei Liaozi had another name in the records of Chongling and even the entire cultivation world, Foreign Wolf King. In the past, most of the areas north of Guangzhou and outside of Guangzhou were controlled by the Fan tribes. The leader of the Fan tribes was Wei Liaozi. Wei Liaozi had been king for more than 20 years, constantly fighting against the Qin dynasty's army. He was only defeated and killed by the Qin dynasty's army a year before the Yuanwu emperor ascended the throne. The one who killed Wei Liaozi was the great general of the Qin dynasty's Tianliang army, Dugu Liangsheng. Dugu Liangsheng was conferred the title of Marquis because of this great merit. In many records, the Qin dynasty had not been able to settle down for more than 20 years. While most of the reason was because of the Han, Zhao, and Wei dynasties, and the majority of the Qin dynasty's power had to be placed on fighting the three dynasties, one of the reasons that could not be ignored was that Wei Liaozi was one of the strongest cultivators in the world at that time. Although Wei Liaozi was killed by my father, it was not because his cultivation was inferior to my father's. To kill him, the Tianliang army paid a heavy price. After Wei Liaozi died, this sword manual was obtained by my father. This sword manual should be the strongest sword manual of the Dugu family. Dugu Bai looked at the shocked Su Lianhua and the others and the calm Ding Ning. His voice grew slower. "I feel that the peacock green move is very strong, but I have never been able to comprehend it. Intuition was sometimes an intangible thing, but for some people it could be described as a unique talent. Let me see the peacock green." Ding Ning did not waste words. When Dugu Bai stopped speaking, he said quietly. Dugu Bai did not hesitate. He reached into his bosom and took out a beast skin. The color of this beast's skin was extremely strange. It was a rare pale green color and looked very tough. However, it was full of worm-like holes. Many of the words and lines on it were worn out to the point of almost disappearing. It was obvious that it was an extremely old item. Even Zhang Yi, who was boiling water, was dazed and forgot to look at the fire. Ding Ning's pupils contracted slightly. He felt endless respect for this youth of the Dugu family. This was clearly the original copy of Dugu Bai's Wisdom King Sword Manual. It was related to the secrets of some of Dugu Bai's sword moves, but this youth took it out directly. But he did not hesitate in his actions. He reached out, took the beast skin from Dugu Bai's hands, and opened it in front of him. Dugu Bai's gaze did not linger on this beast skin that he had studied countless times. He was familiar with every word, every line, and even every hole and crease on the animal's skin. When Ding Ning lowered his head and started to look at the beast skin, his pupils started to contract a few breaths later. A strong intuition filled his heart. He took a deep breath and started to wait silently. More and more students walked out of the shadows of the cliff. These students did not know what the beast skin in Ding Ning's hands was, or what Ding Ning was doing. But when they saw the people sitting next to Ding Ning, they were shocked. They did not understand why Su Lianhua, Xia Wan Xin, and even Dugu Bai were sitting quietly next to Ding Ning. These students were not the only ones who could not understand. Did you think this would happen? Pan Rui looked at the youthful figures bathed in the sunlight and turned to look at Huang Jinwei. No. Huang Jinwei shook his head and then said gently, but I can understand the reason. Pan Rui glanced at him. Huang Jinwei said emotionally, because they are young, too young, they are easily impulsive. It is wrong to use the thoughts of adults to predict their actions. Also, because they are too young, even if they do something wrong, adults will not punish them too harshly. Even if children did something wrong, they would be forgiven more easily than adults. Children had the right to be impudent, but even so, could this wine shop youth win? Pan Rui looked at Ding Ning's figure in the distance and did not understand her own emotions. Gurgling noises could be heard from the pot. The water was boiling. Zhang Yi opened the lid and used the boiling water to scald the porcelain bowls on the stove. Then he started to serve water to everyone. Please have tea. When he handed a bowl of hot water to Dugu Bai, Zhang Yi bowed slightly with true gratitude. In his mind, any action that could help his little sect brother was worthy of his thanks. But when he saw the clear water without even a single tea leaf, he felt that he had used the wrong words and said bashfully, "Please have some water." Dugu Bai smiled and took the bowl Zhang Yi handed over. He was about to speak. At this time, his smile froze slightly. Ding Ning, who had been looking down at the sword manual, looked up. Ding Ning looked up into the distance at the shadows on the cliffs. Everyone was unconsciously led by his gaze and looked in that direction. Zhang Yi turned around and saw the person walking out of the cliffs. His eyes filled with joy, and he could not help but shout, "Nangong Kaishu!" At this time, half of the girl's body was dyed red with blood, and her hair was messy. She looked like she was having a hard time walking. However, when she heard Zhang Yi's cry of surprise, she also exclaimed in surprise. Her body seemed to be filled with strength, and with a stride, she actually jumped up. Dugu Bai knew that this young girl was Nangong Kaishu of the Green Vine Sword Academy. He understood the joy of Zhang Yi and the others, but felt some disappointment. But at this time, Ding Ning's voice reached their ears. "I know the crux of the problem." A wave of heavy breathing sounded. Everyone around Ding Ning looked back at him. Even Dugu Bai himself felt that his expression was very stiff. He could not help but say, "You know the root of the problem?" Ding Ning handed back the green beast skin and nodded. He said, "Let me see your sword." Dugu Bai took a deep breath. He took the beast skin with his left hand and put it into his bosom. Then he pulled out his sword with his right hand. A beautiful light green color appeared in everyone's eyes. A long sword as thin as a cicada's wing appeared in Dugu Bai's hand. The hilt was a faint yellow. The blade was a faint green. It was so thin it was half transparent. There were many seal scripts carved on the surface that seemed to penetrate the half-transparent blade. The entire sword was like a dragonfly's wing. This sword was Wei Liaozi's sword in the past. Wei Liaozi used this sword to fight against his enemies. Dugu Bai took another deep breath. Then he looked at Ding Ning and said, "I did not choose any other sword in the Sword Valley." Before Nangong Kaishu passed through the hut in front of them, before Su Lianhua and the others could ponder the meaning of Dugu Bai's words, Ding Ning looked at Dugu Bai and said calmly, "So your father and the generals of the Tianliang army should not have seen Wei Liaozi use the peacock green sword move." Dugu Bai's body shook. He looked solemnly at Ding Ning, nodded, and said, "Yes." Su Lianhua and the others had disbelief in their eyes again. Of course, Ding Ning could not have seen the battle back then. There was only one possibility for him to say something so certain. He had seen the crux of this sword move. The air seemed to freeze. Dugu Bai looked at Ding Ning and said, "Is it a problem with the sword?" Ding Ning shook his head and said, "It is a problem with many swords." Chapter 277. The Problem of Many Swords. Dugubai suddenly realized something, and his face paled. Ding Ning glanced at him and did not speak. Dugubai looked at Ding Ning and could not help but repeat, "Is it really the problem of many swords?" Ding Ning still did not speak, just looked at him and nodded seriously. The two's conversation seemed to be in riddles, but everyone present could hear the meaning. Is it not a sword form that can be used with one sword? Xiaowan unconsciously said. Ding Ning nodded again. There are many sword forms that cannot be used with one sword, but this sword form is very special and cannot be used with two swords. Dugubai also looked up and said with difficulty, "Does it require many swords?" Su Lianhua understood, but found it inconceivable. How do you use many swords? Ding Ning looked calmly at everyone and said softly, "A sword form that requires many swords to be used. First, this person's hand must be very fast, and they may not have many swords in their hand. When they make this move, they may allow this sword to fly out, and their hand may have already grasped another sword." Everyone was shocked, speechless, as they thought about that scene. A hint of bitterness appeared at the corners of Dugubai's mouth. He said in a trembling voice, "Peacock green. Only peacocks will be completely green when they spread their tails. So this sword form is not much different from throwing many swords?" Ding Ning said, "There is not much difference." Dugubai said dazedly, "How did you think of it, and so quickly?" Obstacles to knowledge often come from fixed thinking. Almost all sword manuals pursue absolute control of the sword. The sword is like a person's arm and cannot be let go. But some sword forms are different. When you feel you cannot understand, you can try to think in a different way. Do not think about whether it is reasonable or not. First get the result. Then think about how to approach this result, and think of possible ways to reach this result. Ding Ning said calmly. The depths of Dugubai's eyes went blank for a moment before they brightened, becoming as bright as stars. His mind became even brighter. Many swords rose up at the same time. Many swords flew out along different paths, as beautiful as peacocks spreading their tails. His vision seemed to be filled with a beautiful patch of green. The problems that had troubled him for many years were suddenly solved. He comprehended the peacock green form. Great shock retreated from his eyes like a tide, and then turned into admiration. "Thank you for your guidance." He stood and bowed deeply to Ding Ning. Everyone noticed his choice of words. At the start, he had said discussion. Now, he was speaking of guidance. People of the same generation discussed. Only when a teacher taught a junior would he speak of guidance. Dugubai was facing Ding Ning, like he was facing his teacher, but the surrounding people did not feel anything was wrong. "You should be first in this sword trial." Dugubai continued, "Is this sword understood?" Zhang Yi looked at Dugubai and said, he was the only person in the crowd who did not feel too shocked. He only felt happy. He even subconsciously felt that it was normal for his junior brother to be able to comprehend the profundity of this sword. At this time, he only suspected that Dugubai had not truly practiced it, and that there would be problems with his final judgment based on imagination. "Understood," Dugubai answered seriously. Then he walked forward and took down several pieces of wood from the hut in front. He sat down again below Ding Ning, and then started to use the long sword that was like a dragonfly's wing to cut the wood to make a wooden sword. Many people in the distance could not hear the conversation between Dugubai and Ding Ning. They did not know what had happened, and did not know what Dugubai was doing. But they saw Dugubai bow to Ding Ning and sit below him. These people who had been shocked by Xian, Su Lianhua, Dugubai, and the others sitting next to Ding Ning were even more shocked. Nangong Kaishu walked through the hut to Ding Ning's side, and then sat down. The left side of her robe was dyed red with blood. But before Zhang Yi could go forward to ask about her wounds, she said simply to Zhang Yi, "I am fine." Seeing her sit down next to him, Ding Ning nodded and did not speak. Nangong, Saishu's bravery, and Ding Ning's calmness caused many people in the distance to feel restless. "Who are you looking at?" Su Lianhua frowned slightly and could not help but ask. He found that Ding Ning was looking into the distance. At the start, he thought that Ding Ning was worried about Shen Yi, Xie Chongsheng, and the others who had not come out. But he gradually realized that Ding Ning's gaze was not on the cliff exit most of the time, but on those who had come out and were resting or treating their wounds. Hearing Su Lianhua's question, Ding Ning shook his head. "I do not know." Su Lianhua was shocked. "You do not know? There are not many people who can truly threaten me." Ding Ning understood his puzzlement. Still looking at the students in the distance, he explained, "Among those people, the only ones who can threaten me are Yi Haoren and Ku Shichuan, but not just those two." "You mean that someone is hiding their true strength, and this person may be stronger than Yi Haoren and Ku Shichuan?" Su Lianhua immediately understood Ding Ning's meaning. His gaze flashed. "You want to find him ahead of time?" Ding Ning nodded. He was more familiar than anyone with the Empress' most skilled moves. So Lai Yinghong, who was ranked first on the Book of Talents, was definitely not her final strength. And this person would definitely be stronger than Lai Yinghong. If this person's sword manual was more exquisite than Lai Yinghong's, it was nothing to Ding Ning. But if this person's vital energy cultivation was far above Lai Yinghong's, and he could not find this person ahead of time and detect this person's true strength, he would not have absolute confidence in the trials. What made his heart heavy was that up until now, he had not discovered who this person was. Who was that person? Su Lianhua looked at the figures of the students in the distance, and his breathing unconsciously sped up. At this time, other than the people sitting around Ding Ning, there were 15 or 16 students who had passed. He recognized almost all of them. Most of them were not as seriously wounded as him, but they would be seriously wounded at normal times. There were only 4 who did not appear to be wounded. Other than Ku Shichuan and Yi Haoren, there was a youth dressed in yellow robes and a young woman dressed in plain robes like Xiaowan. Song Yumming, it is not likely. At this time, Xiaowan's voice sounded by his ear. Su Lianhua did not turn to look at Xiaowan. He nodded, and his gaze landed on the young woman in plain robes. Song Yumming was the youth dressed in yellow robes. He was a student from the Heaven Mountain Sword School. The reason it was not likely was not just because the principal of the Heaven Mountain Sword School, Mao Ruoshang, was extremely old-fashioned. He was one of the people who had sympathized with the Bazin Kendo ground in the past and had expressed dissatisfaction with White Goat Cave joining the Green Vine Sword Academy. Also, Song Yumming's father was the Guangyang general of Guangyang Commandery, Song Qiansong. A person of Song Qiansong's position would not allow his son to be controlled by someone else, even if that person was the mistress of Chongling. Song Yumming was not likely. Then was it the young woman dressed in plain robes, Su Shen, a female cultivator from the Sky Snow Taoist Monastery? The Sky Snow Taoist Monastery was a cultivation place that did not participate in court matters. They took in few disciples, and no matter what level the disciples reached, they would stay in the monastery for their entire lives, detached from the world. Was this female cultivator, like He Shanjian, who had just been killed by Bailey Sushua, unable to endure loneliness? Su Lianhua's brow furrowed deeply. At this time, Xiaowan's cry of joy sounded. Su Lianhua turned his head. His eyes were filled with joy, because at this moment, a very familiar figure walked out of the mountain path between the cliffs. Chun Liqiu, dressed in white robes, walked out. Chun Liqiu, him, and Xiaowan were good friends. Liqiu and Lianhua Su Lianhua had fantasized many times that many years later, his name and this good friend's name might be connected together and become a legend. Just like how Zhang Yi had been worried about the safety of Shen Yi and the others, he and Xia Wan had been worried about Chun Liqiu's safety. But in a breath, the joy in Su Lianhua's eyes quickly faded. His face also stiffened slightly. He saw Chun Liqiu pause. Just this pause, when he exchanged a look with Chun Liqiu from the distance, he sensed Chun Liqiu's intentions. Xia Wan also felt it, and her lips started to tremble slightly. Chun Liqiu started to walk again. He silently passed through the hut and walked through the large hole that Zhang Yi and Dugu Bai had made by tearing down the wooden planks. He walked in front of Su Lianhua and Xia Wan, but stopped 10 feet away. Su Lianhua did not look at Chun Liqiu. He looked silently at the ground 10 feet in front of him. Any words at this time would be awkward and displeased. Sometimes you have to lower your head to bear the crown. Chun Liqiu spoke, but he did not speak to Su Lianhua and Xia Wan. He looked at Ding Ning and said seriously in a low voice. Ding Ning had been calmly looking at Chun Liqiu's arrival. Hearing the words, his expression did not change. He looked up slightly and said seriously, "I only know that if I lower my head, I will not see the sword falling from above. The more I lower my head, the more my head will be cut off." Chapter 278. Chun Liqiu bowed slightly to show his respect to Ding Ning, and then turned to look at Su Lianhua and Xia Wan. "I do not want you to be with him." He was silent for a moment and said, "This is an unwise action." Su Lianhua looked at his good friend's face dyed gold by the sunlight, and a self-deprecating smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. Then he lowered his head. For him, sometimes he lowered his head because he did not want others to see his disappointment and sadness. People will always do unwise things in their lives, because many things are more important than intelligence and reason, like friendship. Su Lianhua lowered his head and said slowly, "The breeze in the valley blew on Chun Liqiu's body. The early summer breeze was warm, but Chun Liqiu felt slightly cold. He and Su Lianhua had known each other for a long time, so he could hear the meaning in Su Lianhua's words. If Chun Liqiu was not Ding Ning, but a disciple of White Goat Cave, Su Lianhua would sit next to Chun Liqiu out of friendship. But now he was not willing to sit next to Su Lianhua, so their friendship was gone. Chun Liqiu's mouth tasted slightly bitter. He could not persuade Su Lianhua. After taking a deep breath, he turned to look at Su Lianhua, but Xia Wan turned her head and avoided his gaze. Chun Liqiu got his answer. He was slightly sad, but he did not think his choice was wrong. In his view, friendship could be chosen. He could choose a bright future. Why did he choose to walk down an increasingly narrow path with some people? He turned silently and prepared to pass through the hut to the other side. "Do you want to drink hot water?" At this time, a slightly restrained but polite voice reached his ears. His eyebrows rose, and he looked towards the voice. He saw Zhang Yi holding a bowl of hot water and looking sincerely at him. Chun Liqiu looked into Zhang Yi's eyes. Zhang Yi's gaze was sincere. "I cannot understand." Chun Liqiu did not take the bowl from Zhang Yi's hand and turned to leave. He said softly with a self-deprecating smile, "Who would be willing to die for a bowl of hot water?" Hearing his words, Su Lianhua remained silent. He believed that Chun Liqiu was right. However, there were some things that only concerned people's feelings and had nothing to do with right or wrong. Could it be him? When Chun Liqiu turned to leave, Xia Wan had already turned to look at his back. Now that Chun Liqiu was far away, she spoke softly. "I won't." Just now, Dugu Bai, who had been seriously sharpening the wooden sword and hadn't even glanced at Chun Liqiu, answered her question with certainty. If this is the last chess piece she buried, Chun Liqiu wouldn't have specially said these words. Xiaowan took a sip of hot water. Originally, when a person had been hungry for a long time, even drinking this kind of pure water would have a sweet taste. However, at this moment, she couldn't help but feel bitter. While she had Su Lianhua, Dugubai, and Exin, the other side had Yi Haoren, Ku Shichuan, and now Chun Liqiu. 3 of the top 5 students in the Book of Talents were definitely their opponents. She knew Chun Liqiu's strength well. She knew that Chun Liqiu was much stronger than her. If this was an ordinary time, Su Lianhua and Chun Liqiu might not be able to win. But now, Su Lianhua was seriously wounded. How could he fight? There is also Lai Yinghong and that chess piece. She took a deep breath and said slowly. She didn't finish her sentence, but everyone present understood what she meant. Why has Lai Yinghong not come out yet? Nangong Kaishu, who was treating the wound on her left arm, said coldly. No one knew that Lai Yinghong could not come out because of Shen Yi and Xie Changsheng. In everyone's view, while Lai Yinghong had not appeared, it was only a matter of time. At this time, there were 16 or 17 students on the other side of the hut. In terms of numbers and ranking on the Book of Talents, they were at an absolute disadvantage. Chun Liqiu's footsteps grew distant. The hut quieted again, so quiet that it was slightly unsettling. Actually, it is not so complicated. Ding Ning liked silence, but he did not like to make the people around him feel uneasy. So he said calmly, with so many people, the chances of winning in the end are very high. Everyone's eyes were focused on him. Even Dugu Bai, who had been working on his 5th wooden sword, raised his head to look at him. I do not understand where your confidence lies, but I feel that people have to do some unbridled things in their lives, and do some things that they feel proud of. Exin suddenly laughed, and said sincerely, while even if you fail this time, you are unbridled enough to make me proud, but I still hope that you can succeed in the end. Xiaowan did not speak, but her emotions inexplicably calmed down. She started to understand that this was because there was meaning. As long as she felt that something was meaningful, her past cultivation seemed to have meaning. Her eyes started to shine with a wondrous light. She thought that this might be the true straightforwardness described in the sword manual of the plain Heartsword House. Nangong Saishu's eyes also lit up at this time. He Xiaoxi has come out. She gave a soft exclamation of surprise. A familiar figure that looked tired but extremely muscular walked out of the mountain path between the cliffs. Fortunately, you are by my side. Otherwise, I would cry to death. Su Lianhua smiled self-deprecatingly and said to Xiaowan, Fortunately, I do not have many friends to begin with, and will not have such emotions. Dugubai also laughed. In their sight, He Xiaoxi, covered in blood, walked over without hesitation when he saw Ding Ning and the others. Making friends also depends on the timing. Exin added. Then he also laughed. Xiaowan's heart suddenly warmed. She could not help but laugh. She knew that she might have just lost a friend, but she would gain many true friends here. I really don't understand how they can laugh in such a situation. A youth in light blue brocade robes looked at these people's smiles from a distance and could not help but frown as he spoke to the person next to him. This youth was Zhou Wangnian, who had argued with Xie Changsheng at the start of the trials. At this time, the back of his brocade robes was covered in wounds. Some of the wounds were so deep that bones could be seen. A student behind him was bandaging his wounds. Inexplicably, compared to the wounds on his back, these people's smiles made his heart feel cold. The crude hut naturally separated the two sides. There were fewer people on Ding Ning's side compared to their side. But at this time, Ding Ning and the others were sitting quietly. Not just Zhou Wangnian, but almost everyone on their side felt that Ding Ning and the others were giving them increasing pressure. Time slowly passed, and the sky gradually darkened. At the start, the students came out one after another. The intervals between the students who came out grew longer until no one appeared for a long time. Zhang Yi's heart suddenly sank. Some cultivators in indigo robes appeared in his sight. These cultivators were coming from the mountain paths between the cliffs towards the mountain valley they were in. The cultivators of Min Mountain Sword Sect were continuously appearing. In his mind, there was only one possibility. The sea of brambles ahead was about to end. At this time, he did not feel joy because Lai Yinghong had not appeared. He just thought that Shen Yi and the others had not appeared. A strange noise rang out. Most of the students in the mountain valley started to discover this reality. Su Lianhua and Xiaowan could not help but exchange a look. At this time, heavy footsteps sounded on the cliffs. It was already the end, and almost everyone's breathing became rough along with the heavy footsteps. The heavy footsteps were like the beating of war drums, reverberating in everyone's hearts. Nangong Saishu's eyes widened to their limits. She saw that figure with everyone else, but because she was the most familiar with that person, she was the first to cry out involuntarily, "Su Hashan!" Gasps of disbelief sounded. Nangong Kaishu was not wrong. The one who walked out was not Lai Yinghong, but Su Hashan. Why is it like this? Zhou Wangyan could not help but shout. Everyone knew that Lai Yinghong, ranked first on the Book of Talents, was very strong, and Su Hashan was a negligible existence to them. Many students near him frowned deeply. Su Hashan was on Ding Ning's side. At this time, even if there was one more person on Ding Ning's side, the air around them would grow heavier. But at this time, all the sound suddenly disappeared. Su Hashan seemed to hear Nangong Saishu's shout and suddenly stopped. When his figure stopped, Su Hashan looked up. He looked towards where Nangong Kaishu and Ding Ning were. He opened his mouth, wanting to speak, but no sound came out. A mouthful of blood surged out of his mouth. As the blood surged out of his mouth, everyone saw that his hands had been pressing hard against his abdomen. Blood continued to flow from the gaps between his fingers. At this time, he seemed to have used up all his strength. His hands could not hold and let go. As his hands loosened, a stream of blood mixed with intestines flowed out of the wound on his abdomen. Everyone held their breaths. Nangong Saishu's body froze, and her face turned pale. A streak of sword light fell from the sky. The moment Su Hashan fell on his back, it had already reached his side. The sword light flashed, and Su Hashan's figure disappeared from everyone's sight. But the scene in that moment was deeply imprinted in everyone's minds. Before entering the sea of brambles, Gongren had said that this would be extremely difficult, and there was the danger of their intestines being pierced. Yet no one had expected such a thing to happen. Even though such an injury might not be fatal, this scene was unbearable for many young students like them. Zhou Wangmian's body uncontrollably trembled violently. Maybe this is the result of standing on his side. His voice was trembling as he muttered to himself in a chilling tone. Chapter 279. Zhang Yi looked at the pool of warm blood in the distance and unconsciously walked forward in pain. He instinctively wanted to ask the Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivators dressed in green jade robes if Su Hashan's life was in danger. Ding Ning frowned slightly. He thought back to every detail of that scene and then looked up at Zhang Yi. He shook his head and said, "Do not go over. Su Hashan will not die." Zhang Yi had always believed in his words, so his footsteps naturally stopped. If it was a fatal wound, the people of Min Mountain Sword Sect would have started to treat him long ago and would not have let him walk out like this. He was so seriously wounded and was able to survive. This is his pride. You should also be proud, Su Lianhua said slowly with narrowed eyes. Nangong Kaishu bowed her head. She felt that Su Lianhua spoke the truth. But when such a scene happened to her good friend, she still felt very cold. Xie was also very cold. Multiple cultivators of Min Mountain Sword Sect had entered the valley. If Su Heshan was really the last to pass, then this meant that Shen Yi and Xie Changshen were trapped in the Sea of Brambles and would not appear here again. The entire valley returned to silence. A Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator, dressed in green jade robes, walked out of the mountain path. Under the light of the setting sun, his long shadow fell on the mountain path behind him, giving people the feeling of a black and long door sealing the mountain path. Suddenly, all the students in the valley sensed something unusual and looked up. Many cultivators appeared on the mountain path, high up in the cliff. Through the different attire of the cultivators, the students could easily judge that these were teachers and court officials from various cultivation places. The teachers of these cultivation places and the officials of the imperial court would also enter this valley. While they did not know why these teachers and court officials were allowed to enter the valley to observe from a close distance, all these signs caused most students to sink into deep shock. The previous test had really ended. Su Heshan was the last examinee to pass the Sea of Brambles. Then where did Lai Yinghong, first on the Book of Talents, go? At this moment, a young girl appeared on the cliff. Following a breeze that blew through the cliff, she didn't seem to think and directly stepped down from the cliff. Her green jade-colored robe swayed gently like a lotus leaf. Her figure passed by many masters of various cultivation places who were still walking on the mountain path in the air and floated down into the valley without any smoke or fire. Looking at this young woman whose eyes contained great confidence and authority, most students felt a mountainous pressure. At the same time, their last thread of uncertainty disappeared. Even in Min Mountain Sword Sect, among all the direct disciples of Min Mountain Sword Sect, there was only one such young woman who could disregard the feelings of others and almost rudely bypass all the teachers of the cultivation places. She even had such presence in front of other Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivators who were older than her. She could only be Jing Liuli. Even Jing Liuli had appeared. The previous test had naturally ended. Other than Ding Ning and a few others, the other students had never seen this legendary young woman before. Seeing Jing Liuli appear in front of them, these students had complicated gazes. Admiration, awe, jealousy, many different lights appeared in their eyes. Jing Liuli's gaze was calm. Even as she landed, she still had a lofty pride. She had the right to be proud, at least in terms of entering Min Mountain Sword Sect to study. Everyone in the valley was still catching up to her steps from many years ago. It is over. Without any opening or self-introduction, Jing Liuli's gaze swept across all the students in the valley, and then she said, simply, she did not cause any ambiguity. After she said these 3 words, she continued to speak without any pause. Next is the final sword test. In 5 minutes, you will compete according to the results of the draw. In this time, you are not allowed to receive any outside treatment. After the competition starts, you are not allowed to speak with the spectators. Jing Liuli's description of the rules of the final test was unusually simple. After saying these words, she walked towards the crude huts that separated the 2 camps. In the growing dusk, her figure appeared more and more otherworldly and seemed to have some kind of indescribable magic, which made many people feel that her walking towards the huts that separated the 2 sides contained some kind of profound behavior. Su Lianhua's gaze passed Jing Liuli's figure and landed on the cultivation teachers who had entered the valley. As these cultivators of different methods and sword manuals entered, the primal energies of the universe in the mountain valley seemed to become chaotic, and his emotions became troubled. His brow furrowed deeply, and he asked in a soft but cold voice, "What is her intention?" She only said 3 sentences about the rules. She was not even willing to mention the one-on-one competition, but in reality of the 3 sentences, the most important is the last one. She wants to give some people a chance to speak. Hearing his words, Ding Ning turned his head and said calmly, or rather, Min Mountain Sword Sect wants to give some people a chance to speak and see how some people will behave. Not allowing the spectators to speak after the competition starts means that she is allowing people to speak at this time. Su Lianhua's brow was still furrowed. He could not completely understand. Something must have happened in Min Mountain Sword Sect. Ding Ning looked towards the distant cliffs and said slowly, "But we cannot see it. Some people really know how to seize the time." Then he could not help but mock, a scornful sneer at the corner of his mouth. Some of the cultivation teachers were still walking on the mountain path and had not truly stepped into the valley. But at this time, a middle-aged man in yellow robes walked out of the crowd and quickly walked over. Everyone's gazes gathered on this middle-aged man in yellow robes. Everyone was certain who this middle-aged man in yellow robes was going to get close to. Jing Liuli, standing in the crude hut with her hands behind her back, showed a hint of disdain. Yet she only watched silently and did not stop this middle-aged man in yellow robes. "I do not know what that person has to say." Nangong Kaishu looked at the middle-aged man in yellow robes who was quickly walking closer and said with a cold expression. Her personality was one that hated evil. She knew that this middle-aged man in yellow robes was the attendant of Palace Attendant Rome. In her view, Xue Wangxu was dead, and Palace Attendant Rome had personally acted on the mountain path. Palace Attendant Rome should not have the face to send someone to say anything. Also, there was no meaning in saying anything. Her voice was not low. The middle-aged man in yellow robes had vital energy cultivation far above her, and heard her clearly, but his expression was calm and even had a natural deference. After passing by the crude hut, the middle-aged man in yellow robes stopped and bowed respectfully to Ding Ning. "I do not know your final decision." Then this yellow-robed middle-aged man opened his mouth and said calmly and clearly, "However, before you make your final decision, I hope that you will seriously consider it, because you should understand that you are not only rejecting some people's futures, you are also rejecting a person's sincere friendship." Su Lianhua, Zhang Yi, and the others stilled slightly. They did not immediately understand the meaning of the middle-aged man in yellow robes' words. Ding Ning raised his head and looked up the mountain again. He knew that someone was looking at him from up high, but he could not see the other. Just this action caused Su Lianhua and the others to understand that the middle-aged man in yellow robes was speaking of Crown Prince Fu Su. Despicable. Su Lianhua suddenly became angry and couldn't help but curse out loud. At the side, Dugubai smiled self-deprecatingly. In the hands of the truly powerful, anything could be used as a means to defeat the enemy. Compared to the truly powerful, individual cultivators were too insignificant. Maybe it is not hard for you to enter the top 10, but it is too difficult for you to win. The middle-aged man in yellow robes looked at Ding Ning, who had not responded, and then turned to look at the students on the other side of the hut. He said in a sincere tone, "You only have a few people, and the other side is many times your number. If one of you is defeated in one round, then most of the people in front of you will be enemies who will fight to the death. If you are fated to not win, do not reject the good intentions of some people." Hearing the middle-aged man's words, Ding Ning's expression remained calm. He shook his head and said, "If they are true friends, they will still think of me as a friend after their good intentions are rejected." The middle-aged man in yellow robes did not speak, bowed and left. Ding Ning's calmness caused Su Lianhua and the others to quickly calm down. They looked at the students in the distance and knew that the middle-aged man in yellow robes' words were not unreasonable. At a glance, there were 37 students standing in the distance. This was 4 times their number. If the first round passed, and they had more people eliminated, then only 2 or 3 of the remaining 20 students would be on their side. They were indeed very weak and powerless. But at this time, the middle-aged man in yellow robes suddenly paused. At this time, a person slowly walked out from the students in front of him and walked towards Ding Ning and the others. That person seemed to be afraid of the cold and wore thicker robes than ordinary people. Su Lianhua, Xia Wan, and the others looked in shock at this person's figure. Li Shixing. Chapter 280. Li Shixing, who was silent and bold, cunning and careful, slowly walked over in robes much thicker than the other students. He gave off the feeling of a lone wolf. He was not famous in Chongling. Up until now, most of the students at the trials did not know his identity, and even thought that he was a person from the border. But Su Lianhua and Xia Wan naturally knew Li Shixing's identity, because Li Shixing was too silent and inconspicuous. When Li Shixing walked over from the crowd, she realized just now she had overlooked the existence of such an expert. In these years, Li Shixing had not been in Chongling, and no one had seen him leave. But before he had been exiled to the Yuezhi country, Li Shixing had always been one of the best among his peers. If she faced Li Shixing alone, she did not have much confidence in winning. She could not understand the meaning of Li Shixing's actions. Ding Ning had never seen Li Shixing before, and did not know that Fu Su had once stopped Li Shixing from meeting him. But when he heard Su Lianhua and Xia Wan say this person's name, he immediately knew this person's identity. His eyebrows rose slightly, but he did not speak as he looked at Li Shixing walking over. Li Shixing also did not speak. He walked until he was next to Ding Ning, Su Lianhua, and the others, and then sat down on an empty spot. Su Lianhua frowned and was about to speak, but this situation did not seem to be an obstacle for a gentleman like Zhang Yi. Looking at Li Shixing, who sat down, Zhang Yi bowed gratefully and shyly. He asked softly, "You also want to help my junior sect brother Ding Ning?" Li Shixing still did not speak. He did not return the bow, and just nodded. "Why?" Xia Wan looked at Li Shixing and was still suspicious. Dugubai's breathing unconsciously paused. He had left Chongling when he was young and did not have many interactions with Li Shixing. But he had heard some rumors about Li Shixing. He felt that people like Li Shixing were very fragile, and Xia Wan's attitude would cause many bad consequences. As Dugubai had expected, he saw strong enmity rise in Li Shixing's eyes. Yet, to Dugubai's surprise, Li Shixing did not express anything. He slowly turned his head and looked at Ding Ning. "My father wishes for me to deal with you." Hearing his first words, Su Lianhua, Zhang Yi, and the others were stunned. "That's why I didn't come over at first." Li Shixing continued, "I like people with principles. Many times in Chongling, one must obey, but I do not like to obey. My principle is to follow my heart. Just like Duanmu Jingzong that day. Everyone thought I should not hit him, and did not allow me to hit him, but I still broke 2 of his ribs. Just now that I've heard your conversation with that person, I'm sure that you're not willing to comply, so I came over. What's more, there are already many swords that want to deal with you. There's no point in adding another sword like me." These words sounded particularly strange. Or rather, the reason was very strange. At the side, Xian could not help but frown. But inexplicably, for a person like Li Shixing, such a reason sounded very convincing. Ding Ning looked at Li Shixing and did not ask any other questions. He said seriously, "You just returned to Chongling not long ago." Everyone reacted and looked at Li Shixing in a different light. Ding Ning's words pointed out the likely result of Li Shixing's actions. He would be exiled again. Li Shixing was silent for a moment and said, Changling may not be as good as the Yuezhi, at least in my eyes. Hearing his answer, Dugubai's frown eased, and he felt some respect. Well said. Su Lianhua stopped looking at Li Shixing and turned to look at the distant students. He looked at Chen Liqiu's figure that was about to disappear into the darkness and said with slight disdain, What obedience! When people live in the world, the most important thing is to be happy. If one is not happy when they have power and cultivation, what is the point of cultivation? Zhang Yi relaxed completely and felt even more admiration for Li Shixing. He bowed again and said, Many thanks. Do not thank me, Li Shixing said coldly. Even if I stand on your side now, I may not be helping you because Duanmu Jingzong became a disciple of Min Mountain Sword sect many years ago. Su, Lianhua, Dugubai, and the others exchanged a look. They all knew this was the truth. Duanmu Jingzong of the Duanmu Marquisate establishment had passed Min Mountain Sword sect's exam a few years ago and had been cultivating in Min Mountain Sword sect for many years. But they had not thought of this at the moment. Zhang Yi stilled. You mean you feel that because of your help, even if my junior sect brother Ding Ning wins and enters Min Mountain Sword sect to study, Duanmu Jingzong will take revenge on my junior sect brother. Because of you, you may feel that it is impossible. Li Shixing did not look at Zhang Yi and looked coldly into the distance. But Duanmu Jingzong is such a person. Li Shixing was not good at chatting. In both expression and tone, he gave people a feeling of being unreasonable and unapproachable. But Zhang Yi did not seem to think so. In his eyes, Li Shixing was his friend. Since they were friends, he could tolerate him. He could not help but ask curiously, I heard that when you broke Duanmu Jingzong's ribs, he was only 5 years old. Why do you have such a conclusion? 5 years old? Li Shixing could not help but sneer. So, you probably would not have thought that a 5-year-old child would be so sinister and vicious. Just because he did not like someone, he would often do some evil things and then lie to frame that person. He would often put some dirty things in that person's water and even set up some tricks on the stairs to make people fall and break their limbs. Everyone stilled. Even Ding Ning stilled. Zhang Yi's limbs unconsciously grew cold. After a long pause, he looked in disbelief at Li Shixing and said in a trembling voice, You say that when Duanmu Jingzong was 5 years old, he schemed to harm you in every way? Li Shixing did not answer. He was not skilled at conversing with people, so he felt that he did not need to answer. So you broke his ribs that time, not because of a temporary conflict, but because he had done many things like this before. You have tolerated him for a long time. Zhang Yi started to understand. His body trembled slightly. He started to feel that if this was true, then his exile for so many years was unfair to Li Shixing. Li Shixing was silent for a moment. If that was the case, I might not have been so heavy-handed. Suddenly, he raised his head and said angrily, I raised a dog, a puppy that was abandoned when it could drink milk. But when the dog finally grew a little, and I finally didn't have to feed it goat milk anymore, and it could follow me everywhere, it floated in the well as a corpse. Ding Ning's gaze flashed slightly. Su Lianhua, Xia Wan, and the others could not help but take a deep breath and look at each other. Zhang Yi's face paled. Duanmu Jingzong threw him into the well. It is hard for a child to do things without leaving traces. It is not hard to find out. Many people can easily find out. Even my father knows that it was Duanmu Jingzong who did it. So he asked me not to do anything out of line. But because it was done by someone of Duanmu Jingzong's background, father warned me. Li Shixing laughed harshly. The Duanmu family also gave me an even cuter dog, but they did not know. This made me even more certain that it was Duanmu Jingzong. I promised all of them, but I did not want to obey. So I broke Duanmu Jingzong's ribs. If not for the fact that I was too young and did not have enough strength, Duanmu Jingzong would have died. Li Shixing's eyes flashed with an indescribable bitterness. He took a deep breath and said, because at the time, I did not just want to break his ribs, I wanted to kill him. Wanting a person to pay with their life because of a little dog. This was indeed too ruthless. However, when it happened to a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old, there didn't seem to be anything wrong with it. At least, even Zhang Yi could not judge if Li Shixing was right or wrong. He just felt that Duanmu Jingzong should not have done this. This should not have happened in the first place. To that woman, you are like a dog. I am just like a dog that can be crushed to death or thrown into the well. But even if I die, I do not want them to be so happy. Li Shixing did not know why he had said so much today, why he was so angry at the old matters he had almost forgotten. But he felt exceptionally happy inside. His chest was so hot it seemed to burn. Ding Ning turned to look at him and laughed. Then let's fight. He laughed and then stood up. In this moment, everyone around him seemed to have a fire burning in their chests. Chapter 281. The setting sun was about to disappear into the distant horizon. At this time, the clouds in the sky were so red they looked like they were about to burn. All the students, even those who were seriously injured, struggled to stand up because the final sword test was about to start. Xie Ro looked at the side of Ding Ning's face. She saw Ding Ning's eyes light up, and the sky around him darkening. She looked down and saw her shadow was like a faint wing behind Ding Ning's shadow. She increasingly felt that she was not a person of Ding Ning's world. But at this time, she felt that even if she was just a small invisible wing behind Ding Ning, she would do all she could. Every person has a stage in their life where they do not accept their fate and do not accept it. Palace attendant Rong walked out of the resting tent and passed by the middle-aged man in yellow robes who was standing respectfully with his head bowed. She looked at the distant clouds and said coldly, I am only teaching them that people must accept their fate. Mountains have natural heights, much less people. Those naturally short mountains want to compete with the tall mountains. Other than wasting effort, they will make themselves and others unhappy. Being exiled for a dog represents justice in the eyes of children, but stupidity in the eyes of adults. The middle-aged man in yellow robes listened silently to Palace attendant Rong's words. There was no discontent or opposition in his eyes. He felt that Palace attendant Rong was speaking the truth. He had also had a stage in his life where he did not accept his fate, but now he accepted his fate. If people accepted their fate, they would not feel much unwillingness. But the hardest thing in life was to accept fate. Among the many officials who had entered the mountain valley, Sikong Lin, the vice bureau chief of the Bureau of Ceremonies, looked at Ding Ning and the others who had stood up. His eyes gradually lit up. Yantai Guanjian silently appeared behind Jing Liuli. The last sword test this time will be the most exciting and intense of all the tests in the past. Looking at the students standing silently on the two sides of the hut, Yantai Guanjin shook his head and said softly with emotion. Jing Liuli nodded in agreement, but she did not feel any pride. The main reason was that the youth from the alley and low-level cultivation place was not willing to accept his fate. Chengdong is here. An abrupt and cold shout rang out in the valley. The student who heard his name shook and looked at the Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator, dressed in green jade robes, who had spoken coldly. I'm ashamed of Zhang. Only when this Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator's voice sounded did this student and the surrounding people react. The final competition had started without any opening remarks. This isn't fair. The moment he reacted, the first student whose name was mentioned shouted in a daze. Many people felt the same way. This student called Chung Donglai came from the Secret Stone Dao School and was ranked 41st on the Book of Talents. His opponent, Zhong Kuei, came from Jingyan Sword School and was ranked 21st on the Book of Talents. There was a large difference in cultivation between the two, especially since Chung Donglai's left thigh had a serious penetrating wound. It was difficult for him to move, and intense movements could cause him to bleed profusely. On the other hand, Zhong Kuei only had light wounds. How is it unfair? Hearing Chung Donglai's dazed shout, the Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator who announced the matchups looked expressionlessly at him and said slowly, the matchups were randomly selected. The difference in cultivation is a problem of daily cultivation. The wounds on your body are the remnants of the previous event. Do you feel that the trials only have the last event, and the previous events do not count? If you feel it is unfair, you can forfeit. After a pause, this Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator added emotionlessly. The student called Chung Donglai's face was as white as snow, but hearing these words, he could not speak and did not dare to say anything in response. The other students could only maintain their silence. This Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator had randomly selected such a matchup. Naturally, there were many areas worth considering and questioning, especially now that there were 45 students who had passed the previous events. In these 2-on-2 matches, one person would have one less fight and would have a great advantage. But this was Min Mountain Sword Sect's sword trials. These were the rules of Min Mountain Sword Sect. Just like this Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator said, if one felt it was unfair, there was no other way but to withdraw. Sun Changji against Sun Kaitian. Nieyan against MOU. The Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator, who announced the matchups, had no interest in looking at the expressions of Chung Donglai and the others. He continued to speak slowly. Hearing his announcement, all the students had different expressions and reactions. Some were calm, some sneered silently, some forced smiles, and some were ashen. Some attentive students found that there were 8 areas in the mountain valley marked out by the sword marks. Huang Jinlian against Xie. Just as these students had expected, after the 8th group was announced, this expressionless Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator paused, and then casually pointed at the 8 sides of the field, indicating that the 2 sides whose names were announced could enter now. Following the Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator's gesture, almost all the students looked at Xie. The reason was simple. While everyone wanted to see Ding Ning fight, in the first batch of 16, Xie was the only cultivator standing next to Ding Ning on the other side of the crude hut. Su Lianhua and the others had grave gazes. Huang Jinlian was ranked 17th on the Book of Talents. Xie did not cultivate in Changling to begin with, so she did not have a ranking on the Book of Talents. In the eyes of most students, she was the same as Xie Changshen. She had relied on the wealth of the Xie family and used some dishonorable method to qualify to attend the Min Mountain Sword trials. Xie had not expected that she would be the first cultivator to fight. Under everyone's gazes, she started to become nervous. Her right hand holding her sword started to tremble. The black long sword in her hand also started to tremble. Looking at her black sword that looked no different from the ordinary long swords of the Qin dynasty, most students felt that she had no chance of winning. But no one noticed that not far behind Huang Jinlian, a cultivation teacher dressed in the same robes as Huang Jinlian suddenly changed expression. Of course, he could not have predicted that Huang Jinlian would face Xie, but he remembered some scenes in the Sea of Brambles. He opened his mouth and could not help but speak. But at this moment, a Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator appeared in front of him. This Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator came from the side and had his back to him. Yet this cultivator who wanted to warn Huang Jinlian suddenly realized something and closed his mouth with a pale face. The trials had started. Based on the rules Jing Liuli had spoken of, he could not say anything to warn now. Xia Rou took a deep breath and prepared to fight. Ding Ning's expression was calm as he nodded at her. It was just a simple action, but Xia Rou suddenly gained a lot of confidence. Her hand, holding her sword, no longer trembled. Huang Jinlian was already walking towards the area marked by the sword marks. He was tall, his expression cold, and his gaze steady as he looked forward. He gave off the feeling of a military general. The Steel Screen Sword School he cultivated and liked to send students to the battlefield to cultivate. According to some accurate information, Huang Jinlian and some students of the Steel Screen Sword School had participated in some of the battles before the Deer Mountain Conference when the Qin dynasty took back Yangshan Commandery. Compared to Xia Rou, he had been very confident from the start, so he did not even look back at his teacher and did not detect a Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator standing in front of his teacher. He had the style of a Chongling cultivator. He did not walk towards the area closest to him, but the area closest to Xia Rou. Please. When Xia Rou stopped in front of him, he pulled out his sword and held it across his chest, nodding in greeting. At this time, the other two sides were mostly in position. But because this battle had special meaning, most people's gazes gathered on him and Xia Rou. The sky was darkening. No one from Min Mountain Sword Sect seemed to have any intentions of lighting a fire. Yet, when Huang Jinlian drew his sword and held it across his chest, the area dozens of feet around him lit up. Huang Jinlian's long sword was completely gold. The golden light was tangible, and the seal scripts on the blade formed 7 blinding spots of light as his vital energy surged. This sword was the 7 Planets sword, the sword of the sect master of the famed 7 Planets Palace of the Han, a good sword that had fallen into the Sword Valley of Min Mountain Sword Sect and had been chosen by Huang Jinlian in the trials. Please. Xia Rou also held her sword. The black sword in her hand became even dimmer under the dazzling sword light of her opponent. Yet for some reason, Huang Jinlian's eyelids unconsciously twitched as he sensed an indescribable presence of danger. Chapter 282. This dim black sword started to tremble slightly. This time, it was not because of Xia Rou's nervousness, but because her vital energy was starting to surge towards the black sword. Huang Jinlian's pupils constricted rapidly. He did not see any vital energy flowing on the surface of the black sword. Xia Rou's vital energy flowed into the black sword through the hilt. At the same time, he saw purple mist start to rise from the tip of the black sword. Countless needle-like purple mist erupted from the tip of the black sword at astounding speed. In a flash, a purple mist formed in front of him. Xia Rou's figure disappeared behind the purple mist. A fierce shout came out of his mouth. His 7 luminaries' sword was still held horizontally in front of his chest as he pushed it forward. The 7 balls of light on the sword connected together to form a moving wall of light in front of him. This was the famous defensive sword form of the Iron Screen Sword School, Hengshan Break. When Xia Rou's vital energy flooded into the black sword, he was sure that the black sword in her hand was not a standard steel sword, and was definitely an astounding famed sword. In a situation where he did not understand the astounding effects of Xia Rou's sword, he naturally took a safe defensive position. The purple mist was powerless and was scattered by his sword. Xia Rou's figure once again appeared in his sight. However, at the same time, a wisp of sweet fragrance rushed into his mind, causing his head to suddenly sink. Poison? Huang Jinlian reacted instantly and let out another shout in an extremely hurried manner. Using this shout and the pressure of his Junyuan, he spat out all the air that he had inhaled in his chest. At the same time, the golden sword in his hand gave off dazzling light and carried an indomitable presence as he slashed forward without pause. The air in front of him suddenly shook, and then there was a boom. It was as though several strong men had appeared in front of his sword and were carrying an enormous pillar towards Xie. This was the mountain-beating form of the Iron Screen Sword School. This was not the most exquisite and vicious sword form of the Iron Screen Sword School, but it was definitely one of the fiercest sword forms. No matter what kind of poison was contained in the purple mist, he was still confident that he could defeat Xie before the poison took effect. Xie's face paled slightly. She swung the dim black sword in her hand, not towards the front, but towards the back. Her body flew backwards like a sparrow with the momentum of this sword. Many students' eyes flashed with surprise. Other than Xie's sword, they started to find that Xie was not as weak as they had imagined. At this moment, this soaring swallow slash was originally used to attack quickly, but now it was used by her to escape backwards. It was extremely exquisite, and the majority of them couldn't react faster or do it better. But in most people's eyes, Xie could not win, because Huang Jinlian's to change. Hiss! There was a tearing sound. Before the rumbling in everyone's ears had disappeared, the sound of cloth tearing could already be heard in the air. Huang Jinlian's head was raised high. His sword turned from a slash to a slash. A crimson-red sword flame separated from his sword and flew upwards towards Xie, who had just flown backwards. This sword flame looked like a burning cloud. The name of the sword style was Burning Cloud. The sword intent spanned across the sky. Even if Xie had grown wings, she would not be able to dodge in time. Xie could only meet it head-on. Looking at this scene, Zhang Yi was extremely nervous. Even his breathing had stopped completely. He felt that Huang Jinlian was very strong. If he was in Xie's situation, he might not be able to receive this blow. The wind and rain roared, followed by thunder. In everyone's sight, Xie did not care about her falling body. Her body fell freely, but the sword in her hand madly swung dozens of times in front of her. The wild sword energy stirred the primal energies of the universe to form a wind and rain. Then purple lightning appeared in the wind and rain. Many of the spectating students were even more shocked. This was the Guanzhong mountain wind and thunder sword form. This blow was very strong. The presence was especially strong. They had never thought that a young girl like Xie could display such a sword essence like many of the Guanzhong elites. Huang Jinlian had not expected this either, but he did not think he would lose. Thinking of Geng Ren's warning, he took a deep breath. While not letting his vital energy go berserk, he sent another wave of vital energy into the 7 luminaries sword in his hand. Pew, 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 pew. Densely packed stabs sounded. The wind and rain met the burning cloud. There was a muffled boom. In this moment, the wind, rain, and thunder all dissipated. Xie, who had been falling freely, swung high into the air and then flew out in a strange posture, like a kite with its string cut. Many people in the field had stopped breathing. Many people narrowed their eyes as they looked at Xie's flying body, thinking about how Huang Jinlian would end the battle. However, right at this moment, Huang Jinlian's powerful body suddenly stopped abruptly. The ground under his feet was soaked by fine raindrops. But as he suddenly stopped, 2 waves of dust exploded under his feet. He once again let out a shrill howl. This time, the howl was filled with intense shock. Among the scattered crimson sword flames, drifting raindrops, and fine lightning in front of him, hundreds of fine black lights were shooting towards him. At this time, Only he had the time to detect these needle-like black lights. Only he could sense that these lights came from Xie Rou's sword tip. These fine black lights came from Xie Rou's black sword. As her vital energies surged, they flew out along with the sword move. Most importantly, these thin black lights emitted an even more intense, sweet, and fishy smell. In just an instant, his eyes became blurry as the two waves of dust exploded under his feet. His right wrist, holding the sword, softly turned, and his entire arm swung rapidly in a circle. The sword light spun in front of him and expanded. The blazing golden sword light formed an open umbrella in front of him. What sword form is this? A student shouted in shock. This was clearly a defensive sword form, more astounding than the horizontal mountain break, but he had never heard of it before. It should be one of the secret swords of the Iron Screen Sword School. The incoming fine black lights were all blocked by Huang Jinlian's sword. However, Huang Jinlian, who was frozen in place, turned pale. A wave of black energy flowed along the sword in his hand to the hilt and then to his hand. A wave of weakness rose in his body as though he had not eaten for many days. Then his vision blurred. He could not see. A muffled bang sounded in front of him. He knew that this was the sound of Xie Rou falling to the ground. He tried to raise his hand, wanting to throw his sword at this moment and turn it into a meteor. But his strength seemed to have been sucked out. When he raised his hand, he sensed that his sword could not reach Xie Rou. How is this possible? His remaining strength turned into a disbelieving shout. The 7 luminary sword in his hand dimmed and fell to the ground. He fell forward powerlessly and knelt on the ground. What sword is this? Many gasps sounded at the same time. Some of the people who spoke were even teachers watching the battle. Everyone could clearly see that Xie Rou's sword contained an astonishing amount of poison. The tip of her dull black sword was densely covered with many tiny holes that spewed out poison. What made them extremely puzzled was that since the poison contained in the sword was so terrifying, then Xie Rou should have been poisoned as well. In such a collision of vital energy, such a highly toxic vital energy should have spread around her body at the same time. But at this time, Xie Rou stood up from the ground. Her body was still trembling, but her figure caused many people to feel fear. Poison dragon blood. It is poison dragon blood. A shout came from an unknown place. Just from the voice, people could feel that this person was filled with terror. Poison dragon blood. It is. Many teachers and students of cultivation places inhaled sharply, their bodies suddenly stiffening. Finally, someone recognized this sword. In the hut, Jing Liuli sneered and said coldly. Yan Tai Guanjian turned his head emotionally and looked at Ding Ning in the dusk. This sword was a legend. It had once been the sword of the strongest cultivator of the last generation of the Zhao dynasty, Lian Siyuan. Inside the seemingly ordinary black iron sword, there was actually a core crystal taken from the body of a real poison dragon embedded in it. Based on the strength of vital energy, the core crystal would emit different poisons. The hilt of this sword was made from the horn of a yellow dragon and could easily resolve the threat of these poisons. In the last war between the Qin and Zhao dynasties, this sword had once killed tens of thousands of Qin soldiers. But because this was a matter from decades ago, this sword had disappeared from the sight of the cultivators of the world with the passing of its master. Few people recognized it. However, this wine shop youth remembered it. Did he know that this sword had belonged to Zhao Kuo, the general of the Zhao dynasty's Chongping Pass after Lian Siyuan's death, and then returned to the Min Mountain Sword Sect's Sword Valley after the Qin dynasty's army defeated Chongping Pass? Zhang Yi looked at Xie Rou, who was standing with a sword in her hand, in disbelief. But as he spoke in a trembling voice, he started to understand why Xie Rou had been able to pass the previous test more easily than most of the students present. Chapter 283. In Chongling, using poison was thought to be dishonorable. In the view of most cultivation places, this was an unorthodox path. Yet no student felt that Xie victory was unfair. This sword came from the Sword Valley of Min Mountain Sword sect. All of them thought to themselves that even if Xie did not choose this black sword when they entered the Sword Valley, this sword would still be in the Sword Valley. They would definitely not choose this dim black sword. Compared to the students, many of the spectating cultivation teachers were more shocked. In terms of cultivation and combat experience, they surpassed the students present. So they could see that this poisonous dragon blood was very suited to the sword forms Xie was skilled in. If it wasn't for that style of Guan Mountain Tempest, then this poisoned dragon saliva wouldn't have been able to release so much poison in such a short period of time. Xie herself did not dare to believe that she had won against Huang Jinlian. She walked towards Ding Ning, Zhang Yi, and the others. Looking up at Ding Ning, she could not help but want to say something. Rest. Looking at her trembling body, Ding Ning said softly. Xie paused slightly and then nodded. She shyly bowed her head and started to rest. At this time, her aura was turbulent and her internal organs had been shaken. She did need to calm down and adjust her breathing, but seeing her so obedient, Ding Ning's heart turned cold. He wondered if he had done wrong. Perhaps he should have been more indifferent to her. He Xiaoxi against Lu Duo. Many people's gazes were still on the sword in Xie's hand. Their shock had yet to fade, but a cold voice sounded. The other 7 fights had not finished yet, but with the extra field, the Min Mountain Sword sect cultivator, who had arranged for the last competition, did not seem to want it to be idle and immediately arranged for another fight. Of the 2 sides fighting, He Xiaoxi happened to be on Ding Ning's side. He Xiaoxi's opponent, Lu Duo, was ranked 22nd on the Book of Talents. He came from the Celestial Life Sword School and ranked much higher than He Xiaoxi. But at this time, almost everyone's gazes were on the sword in He Xiaoxi's hand. Looking at He Xiaoxi's green sword that was as thick as a horse-slaying blade, all the students on the other side of the hut unconsciously thought, "What sword was this? I am going." He Xiaoxi's eyebrows raised slightly. He said these simple words to Ding Ning, Zhang Yi, and the others, and then walked towards the empty field. A purple-robed youth moved at the same time. He was naturally the most outstanding disciple of this generation of the Heavenly Life Sword Academy, Lu Duo. His figure was thin and weak compared to He Xiaoxi. It was like the difference between an adult and a weak youth. But even with Xie's victory, he still had absolute confidence in facing He Xiaoxi, who came from the Green Vine Sword Academy. So when he saw He Xiaoxi calmly walk out, a hint of a disdainful smile appeared at the corners of this thin youth's mouth. "Please." He Xiaoxi stopped the moment he walked into the field. Then he held his sword across his chest and said one word to Lu Duo. Lu Duo frowned slightly and also held his sword across his chest. He Xiaoxi attacked. There was a deafening boom. 2 waves of dust rose under He Xiaoxi's feet as his body sped up. Lu Duo stilled, shock flashing through his eyes. He had not expected He Xiaoxi to be so direct. Also, He Xiaoxi had exploded with great power. Before Lu Duo could move, He Xiaoxi had advanced more than 100 feet. The 2 waves of dust rising from He Xiaoxi's feet did not disperse, but charged at him like 2 enormous arrows. But even though he had lost the initiative, Lu Duo did not panic. He gave a clear howl, and a clear sword energy appeared in front of his silver longsword. He turned sideways, leaving behind afterimages. The clear sword energy stabbed at He Xiaoxi from the side. Attack against attack, speed against speed. He was confident he was faster than He Xiaoxi. This was because he was the fastest student in the Heaven Nurturing Sword Academy. The sword sutras he cultivated all pursued extreme speed. There was a soft hiss. A light seemed to burn on He Xiaoxi's left arm. His clothing had been torn apart by the sharp sword energy, and then started to smoke due to the friction and pressure of the air. He Xiaoxi did not have the time to change his move. His wide sword was still moving forward when Lu Duo's clear sword energy arrived first. At least, Lu Duo was much faster than him in this move. But in this moment, Lu Duo and many other students and cultivation teachers who were watching this battle showed shock and disbelief. He Xiaoxi still did not change his move. Instead, he used his left arm to meet Lu Duo's sword. Blood gushed out of He Xiaoxi's left arm with a soft sound. Then there was the sound of bone and metal grinding. Lu Duo's face turned snowy white. His sword had completely penetrated He Xiaoxi's slightly raised left arm and was stuck in his arm bone. Yet, He Xiaoxi did not seem to feel any pain. The wide sword in his hand did not slow at all. A gust of surging sword wind was pressing down on his chest as if it had materialized. In great terror, Lu Duo gave a sharp shout. He swung his silver long sword horizontally to cut off He Xiaoxi's arm and then his abdomen. But at this time, He Xiaoxi growled, and the wide sword in his hand sped up. Lu Duo's eyes were completely filled by the indigo sword energy. His fighting spirit completely collapsed. The vital energy in his body, under the threat of death, unconsciously surged out of his feet. He let go of his sword, and his body flew backwards like a leaf. He Xiaoxi still advanced and raised his sword. Under Lu Duo's terrified gaze, a waterfall of blood sprayed from his chest to his abdomen. A series of gasps could be heard. A terrifying wound appeared on Lu Duo's chest and abdomen, almost cutting open the front of his body. Yantai Guanjian's figure disappeared from Jing Liuli's side. As Lu Duo's chest was spraying blood, he had appeared next to Lu Duo. In the next moment, he took Lu Duo and disappeared into the shadows of the cliffs behind them. He Xiaoxi's body swayed slightly. He stabbed the wide sword into the ground in front of him and then gripped the silver longsword in his left arm. In the next breath, he pulled the silver longsword out of his arm. An ear-piercing sound of bone being scraped sounded. Many students paled even more. He Xiaoxi stuffed a roll of gauze into his mouth. Then his right hand moved and started to wrap the gauze around his wound to stop the bleeding. Zhang Yi was also shocked speechless. He had not expected He Xiaoxi to use such a decisive method to win this battle so quickly and directly. Su Lianhua and Xiaowan exchanged a look. Then the two of them took a deep breath in unison. They needed to calm their minds. He Xiaoxi's left arm was so heavily wounded that he feared he could not even move it. But with his left arm, He Xiaoxi had defeated Lu Duo. Other than that quick blow, Lu Duo did not even have a chance to show off. This kind of battle, this kind of winning streak, made them feel they had to reevaluate Ding Ning's group. Blackstone Bristle, the opponent Chen Xiang. Xiao Ting against Zhao Bingzhou. Many people could not calm their breathing, but the Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator responsible for the trials spoke emotionlessly. He would arrange a new match when a battle finished. Chun Liqiu against Su Lianhua. What? It was as though they had been lifted by a wave, and before they fell, another wave came. Many students could not help but exclaim when they heard this sound. Su Lianhua was stunned. Xia Wan's mouth was wide, her eyes wide in disbelief. She was one of the people who had exclaimed. Chun Liqiu was also stunned in the darkness. Why is it like this? Chun Liqiu's slightly mutated voice sounded a moment later. He looked at the expressionless Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator and said, "You did this on purpose." Everyone could understand his feelings right now. Just now, the exclamations were not just because this was a battle between two people ranked at the top of the Book of Talents, but more because everyone knew that Chun Liqiu and Su Yanhua had been very good friends before entering this mountain valley. They had just broken off their relationship and separated the two ends of the hut. Yet they were immediately arranged to fight between two people. For these two people, it was really too cruel. But hearing Chun Lichio's shout, the Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivator, holding the scroll, still shook his head emotionlessly. He said coolly, "I did not do it on purpose. It was casual." You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.